In Oakwood Heights, a newly promoted black marketing executive was about to settle into her dream home, until the neighborhood watch captain, Karen Whitfield, decided her daily package pickups looked suspicious. What started as casual porch surveillance spiraled when Karen began filming her evidence and called the cops. Zara Washington wasn't your typical homeowner. For 15 years, she had battled her way up the corporate ladder, known for dismantling hostile boardrooms, with surgical precision and never backing down from systemic bias. When Karen Whitfield reported her to the police for suspicious deliveries, she had no idea she was messing with a woman who had weathered both corporate racism and media firestorms. Zara didn't flinch. She gathered receipts, summoned allies, and stood her ground in front of cameras and neighbors alike, triggering a chain reaction that exposed more than just a false accusation. What began as a petty power trip would become a public reckoning. The carefully curated quiet of Oakwood Heights would never forget the day Karen Whitfield tried to criminalize a homeowner and found herself publicly dismantled instead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Zara Washington stood in the center of her empty living room, sunlight streaming through pristine windows onto hardwood floors that would soon bear the imprints of her family's life. After 15 years of apartment living, saving every bonus, and climbing the corporate ladder, the 4-bedroom colonial in Oakwood Heights was finally theirs. "Can you believe it?" she whispered, more to herself than to Marcus, who was directing the movers with the sectional sofa. "We actually pulled it off." Marcus shot her a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's beautiful, no doubt." He lowered, his voice as a mover passed. "Though I still think we could have found something just as nice in Riverside." Zara's shoulders tensed slightly. They'd had this conversation a dozen times. Riverside was diverse, comfortable, safe. But Oakwood Heights had the best schools in the county, the shortest commute to her office, and the kind of address that made people at corporate cocktail parties nod with respect instead of surprise. "We deserve to be here as much as anyone," she said firmly. "And I'm tired of compromising." Marcus squeezed her hand. "I know, Z, and you're right. I just want us to go in with eyes open." The doorbell chimed, interrupting their moment of quiet tension. Through the sidelight, Zara could see a petite Asian woman holding what appeared to be a houseplant. "Our first visitor," she said, smoothing her hands over her jeans before opening the door. "Welcome to Oakwood Heights." The woman extended the plant, a small, elegant orchid. "I'm Helen Chen from 3 doors down. I'm also the HOA board president, but don't hold that against me." Her laugh was warm and genuine. "Zara Washington," she replied, accepting the orchid. "And this is my husband, Marcus. Thank you so much for the welcome." "We're thrilled to have new neighbors," Helen said, stepping just inside at Zara's invitation. The Johnsons were lovely, but they were in their 80s and not exactly livening up the block party. "You have children?" "Not yet," Marcus answered, joining them. "But hopefully soon. The schools here were a big selling point." "They're excellent," Helen confirmed. "My son just graduated from Oakwood Prep last year, now at Northwestern. Our community really values education." She glanced around at the moving boxes. "I won't keep you, but please don't hesitate to call if you need anything. We have a neighborhood directory I'll drop by once you're settled." As Helen was leaving, another woman approached up the walkway. Taller, with carefully highlighted blonde hair and the kind of tennis outfit that suggested country club membership rather than actual athletics. "Well, Helen Chen, stealing my thunder as usual," the woman said with a smile that didn't warm her pale blue eyes. "I brought a welcome basket, but it looks like you've beaten me to it." "Just dropped off a little orchid, Karen," Helen replied, her tone pleasant but noticeably cooler. "The more welcomes, the better." Karen Whitfield, Zara would later learn her full name, extended a cellophane-wrapped basket of expensive-looking crackers, cheese, and wine. "Karen Whitfield, 487 Oakwood Circle," she announced, looking past Zara into the house. "My husband Richard and I have been here for 20 years. I'm the neighborhood watch captain, among other things." Her gaze returned to Zara and Marcus, lingering just a beat too long, her smile fixed. "And you are?" "Zara and Marcus Washington," Zara replied, accepting the basket with a practiced smile that matched Karen's in warmth. "We're excited to be here." "How wonderful." In Oakwood Heights, a newly promoted black marketing executive was about to settle into her dream home, until the neighborhood watch captain, Karen Whitfield, decided her daily package pickups looked suspicious. What started as casual porch surveillance spiraled when Karen began filming her evidence and called the cops. Zara Washington wasn't your typical homeowner. For 15 years, she had battled her way up the corporate ladder, known for dismantling hostile boardrooms, with surgical precision and never backing down from systemic bias. When Karen Whitfield reported her to the police for suspicious deliveries, she had no idea she was messing with a woman who had weathered both corporate racism and media firestorms. Zara didn't flinch. She gathered receipts, summoned allies, and stood her ground in front of cameras and neighbors alike, triggering a chain reaction that exposed more than just a false accusation. What began as a petty power trip would become a public reckoning. The carefully curated quiet of Oakwood Heights would never forget the day Karen Whitfield tried to criminalize a homeowner and found herself publicly dismantled instead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Zara Washington stood in the center of her empty living room, sunlight streaming through pristine windows onto hardwood floors that would soon bear the imprints of her family's life. After 15 years of apartment living, saving every bonus, and climbing the corporate ladder, the 4-bedroom colonial in Oakwood Heights was finally theirs. "Can you believe it?" she whispered, more to herself than to Marcus, who was directing the movers with the sectional sofa. "We actually pulled it off." Marcus shot her a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's beautiful, no doubt." He lowered, his voice as a mover passed. "Though I still think we could have found something just as nice in Riverside." Zara's shoulders tensed slightly. They'd had this conversation a dozen times. Riverside was diverse, comfortable, safe. But Oakwood Heights had the best schools in the county, the shortest commute to her office, and the kind of address that made people at corporate cocktail parties nod with respect instead of surprise. "We deserve to be here as much as anyone," she said firmly. "And I'm tired of compromising." Marcus squeezed her hand. "I know, Z, and you're right. I just want us to go in with eyes open." The doorbell chimed, interrupting their moment of quiet tension. Through the sidelight, Zara could see a petite Asian woman holding what appeared to be a houseplant. "Our first visitor," she said, smoothing her hands over her jeans before opening the door. "Welcome to Oakwood Heights." The woman extended the plant, a small, elegant orchid. "I'm Helen Chen from 3 doors down. I'm also the HOA board president, but don't hold that against me." Her laugh was warm and genuine. "Zara Washington," she replied, accepting the orchid. "And this is my husband, Marcus. Thank you so much for the welcome." "We're thrilled to have new neighbors," Helen said, stepping just inside at Zara's invitation. The Johnsons were lovely, but they were in their 80s and not exactly livening up the block party. "You have children?" "Not yet," Marcus answered, joining them. "But hopefully soon. The schools here were a big selling point." "They're excellent," Helen confirmed. "My son just graduated from Oakwood Prep last year, now at Northwestern. Our community really values education." She glanced around at the moving boxes. "I won't keep you, but please don't hesitate to call if you need anything. We have a neighborhood directory I'll drop by once you're settled." As Helen was leaving, another woman approached up the walkway. Taller, with carefully highlighted blonde hair and the kind of tennis outfit that suggested country club membership rather than actual athletics. "Well, Helen Chen, stealing my thunder as usual," the woman said with a smile that didn't warm her pale blue eyes. "I brought a welcome basket, but it looks like you've beaten me to it." "Just dropped off a little orchid, Karen," Helen replied, her tone pleasant but noticeably cooler. "The more welcomes, the better." Karen Whitfield, Zara would later learn her full name, extended a cellophane-wrapped basket of expensive-looking crackers, cheese, and wine. "Karen Whitfield, 487 Oakwood Circle," she announced, looking past Zara into the house. "My husband Richard and I have been here for 20 years. I'm the neighborhood watch captain, among other things." Her gaze returned to Zara and Marcus, Lingering just a beat too long, her smile fixed. "And you are?" "Zara and Marcus Washington," Zara replied, accepting the basket with a practiced smile that matched Karen's in warmth. "We're excited to be here." "How wonderful." They began ordering renovation supplies online: paint, cabinet hardware, light fixtures, window treatments, a steady stream of packages arriving daily as they updated the house to their taste. Zara was retrieving 3 packages from their porch. One evening, when she noticed Karen Whitfield power walking past their house for the 3rd time that day, her pace slowing noticeably as she approached their property. Zara nodded politely, balancing the boxes. "More deliveries?" Karen called, pausing at the edge of the lawn. "You two must love online shopping." Zara's smile tightened. "Just some things for the house. We're updating a few spaces." "I see," Karen said, her gaze lingering on the packages. "Well, be careful. We've had some theft issues lately. Packages disappearing. You might want to get a security camera." "Thanks for the tip," Zara replied. "We'll keep an eye out." Karen nodded and continued her walk, glancing back once more before turning the corner. Inside, Marcus was on a conference call in his home office. Zara set the packages down in what would eventually be their renovated kitchen and leaned against the counter, a familiar tension settling between her shoulder blades. Karen's comment could have been innocent. Neighbors looking out for each other. But Zara had lived enough life to recognize the subtext, the suspicion, the subtle message: "You're being watched." She straightened her spine and began opening the packages. This was their home. They'd earned it, they'd paid for it, and they belonged here, regardless of what Karen Whitfield might think. The monthly HOA meeting was held in the community center, adjacent to the neighborhood pool. Karen arrived 15 minutes early, as always, selecting a seat in the front row. She flipped through her meticulously organized binder containing the agenda, previous minutes, and her own notes on community concerns. Helen Chen arrived shortly after, setting up at the head table with the other board members. She nodded to Karen with professional cordiality. They had once been closer, years ago, when Helen first moved to Oakwood. But Helen's ascension to board president, a position Karen had coveted, had created a subtle rift that neither acknowledged openly. "Before we start," Helen announced once the meeting began, "I want to address the recent reports of package theft in the community. We've had 3 incidents in the past month, all on Magnolia Lane and Oak Circle." Karen leaned forward. She hadn't heard about the 3rd theft. "The police recommend installing doorbell cameras if you haven't already, and having packages delivered to secure locations or requiring signatures if possible," Helen continued. "We've also applied for a grant to increase security patrols through the neighborhood." Karen raised her hand. "Have we identified any suspects or patterns? Delivery times, types of packages, anything like that?" Helen shook her head. "Not specifically, though they all occurred during daytime hours when most residents are at work. Officer Reynolds is investigating but hasn't found any leads yet." As the meeting continued, Karen's mind wandered to the Washingtons and their daily package deliveries. She'd counted 6 packages in just the past 3 days. What could they possibly be ordering? And wasn't it coincidental that the thefts had started around the same time they moved in? Back home that evening, Karen stood at her bay window watching as a delivery truck stopped at the Washington house. Zara emerged a few minutes later, bringing in a large flat package, artwork, perhaps, or maybe a mirror. When Richard finally came home after 9, Karen was still by the window. "Everything okay?" he asked, loosening his tie as he set down his briefcase. "Just keeping an eye on things," she replied, not turning around. "Someone has to." Richard sighed, a sound Karen had come to resent. "Karen, maybe you should think about going back to work. Real estate is picking up again, and you were good at it. It would give you something else to focus on." The suggestion stung like a slap. "I have plenty to focus on," she said sharply. "This community doesn't maintain itself, Richard. While you're working late every night, I'm the one making sure Oakwood Heights stays the kind of place where people want to live." Okay, he said, raising his hands in surrender. "I'm going to grab something to eat." As he disappeared into the kitchen, Karen returned her gaze to the Washington house, where lights still burned in several windows. The neighborhood had been so carefully cultivated over the years. The right kind of families, the right kind of homes, the right kind of community. She couldn't quite put her finger on why the Washingtons bothered her so much. They were professional, polite, clearly well off. But something felt off, out of place. And now these package thefts, coinciding with their arrival and their endless deliveries. It might be nothing. But Karen Whitfield had protected Oakwood Heights for 20 years, and she wasn't about to stop now. She would watch, wait, and if necessary, act. After all, if not her, then who? Across the street, Zara Washington closed the blinds, shutting out the sensation of being observed that had followed her from the office to the home that was supposed to be her sanctuary. Tomorrow, she'd look into security cameras of their own, just in case. Karen Whitfield checked the Washington household. From her upstairs guest room window, notepad in hand, with its perfect sightline to their front porch, it had become her unofficial observation post over the past 2 weeks. "You're getting obsessive," Richard had commented 3 days ago, finding her perched there with her coffee. She'd dismissed his concern with a wave. This morning she jotted down, 7:42 a.m., Amazon delivery, small package, retrieved 8:15 by ZW. Karen had been documenting the Washingtons' package deliveries for 11 days now. The pattern was unmistakable, at least one package nearly every day, sometimes more. Yesterday there had been 3 separate deliveries. Her phone chimed with a text from Patricia Lawson, "Heading out for my walk. Anything to report?" Karen smiled. She'd recruited Patricia and Jeffrey Henderson, both longtime Oakwood residents, into what she privately called her neighborhood integrity team. They shared her concerns about maintaining community standards. Nothing yet. Eyes open, though. Karen headed downstairs where Olivia was at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone while picking at a bowl of yogurt. "Morning, sweetheart," Karen said brightly. Olivia glanced up, pulling out one earbud. "Hey. Any plans today?" "Studying with Mia after school. AP history test tomorrow." Olivia hesitated, then added, "I saw you taking pictures of the Washingtons' house yesterday. From your car." Karen's smile tightened. "I was documenting suspicious activity. As neighborhood watch captain." "Mom, they were literally just getting packages. Their own packages." "Olivia, you don't understand. There's been a string of thefts, and suddenly these people move in and receive an unusual number of deliveries. It's my responsibility to—" "These people?" Olivia's voice took on an edge Karen hadn't heard before. "You mean our black neighbors? The ones with actual jobs and a nice car who bought their house just like everyone else here?" Karen set her coffee mug down with more force than intended. "This has nothing to do with race. It's about patterns and community safety." "Sure you would," Olivia muttered, gathering her backpack. "I've got to get to school." "We'll discuss your attitude later, young lady," Karen called as Olivia headed for the door. The slam that followed sent a jolt through Karen's temples. Zara Washington's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the package on her porch. It was a ridiculous reaction. This was her home, her property, her delivery. But she couldn't shake the prickly sensation between her shoulder blades, the feeling of being watched. She turned casually, scanning the street, and caught the curtain falling back into place in the Whitfield home's upper window. Again. Inside, she set the package, cabinet pulls for the kitchen renovation, on the counter with more force than necessary. "You okay?" Marcus looked up from his laptop. "Karen Whitfield is watching me again," Zara said, trying to keep the edge from her voice. "I swear she has a schedule for when our deliveries arrive." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. "We could report her for harassment. And be that black couple? The ones who moved into Oakwood Heights and immediately started filing complaints?" Zara shook her head. "No thanks. Z, if she's making you uncomfortable." "She's making me furious," Zara corrected him, "but not surprised. Just once I'd like to be able to exist without being treated like an intruder." She took a steadying breath. "The cabinet pulls look Great, by the way. They'll be perfect with the new hardware. Marcus recognized the subject change for what it was. Zara's way of reclaiming her space, her joy. As Zara unwrapped the pulls, her phone buzzed with an email notification from her contractor. The custom countertops would be delivered tomorrow, their largest delivery yet. She ignored the flutter of anxiety at the thought of Karen Whitfield, documenting that arrival too. This was her home. She would not be made to feel like a suspect in it. Officer James Reynolds pulled his patrol car to the curb on Magnolia Lane, 2 streets over from the Washington residence. The call had come in 20 minutes ago. Another package theft, the 4th in 3 weeks. The homeowner, an elderly man named Frank Dernier, was waiting on his porch. Happened sometime between 10 and 2, Frank explained, visibly upset. My arthritis medication. I get it delivered monthly since it's hard for me to drive to the pharmacy. Reynolds made notes in his pad. Did you notice any suspicious individuals in the area? Any unfamiliar vehicles? Frank shook his head. Not that I saw, but I was in the back garden most of the morning. Any neighbors with security cameras that might have caught something? The Millers across the street have one of those doorbell cameras. They're checking the footage tonight. Reynolds nodded, handing Frank a card. Have them call me directly if they see anything. Back in his patrol car, Reynolds made a note to increase drive-thrus of the neighborhood. The thefts were still minor, annoying but not high-priority cases. But if they continued, residents would grow increasingly anxious, and anxious communities sometimes took matters into their own hands in ways that created bigger problems. As he pulled away from the curb, Reynolds didn't notice Karen Whitfield's sedan slowly passing through an intersection a block away. The driver's attention fixed on his patrol car. By evening, Karen had compiled a full week of observations in her new activity log, delivery times, package sizes, retrieval patterns. She'd managed to capture several photos of Zara collecting packages, though from a distance that kept most of them grainy. She was composing an email to Officer Reynolds when Richard arrived home, earlier than usual for once. What are you up to? He asked, noticing her laptop. Just some neighborhood watch business, she said vaguely. Something in her tone must have alerted him, because he moved behind her to glance at the screen. His expression darkened when he saw the photos of Zara Washington. Karen, tell me you haven't been photographing our neighbors. She closed the laptop defensively. I'm documenting suspicious activity. It's my responsibility as what? Self-appointed surveillance chief? Richard ran a hand through his thinning hair. This isn't normal, Karen. You're fixating on these people who've done nothing wrong except move into our neighborhood and order some packages. 11 packages in 7 days, Richard. Right when we're having a string of thefts. You don't find that suspicious? Richard's laugh held no humor. No, I find it normal for people who just moved into a new house and are probably ordering furniture, decor, whatever. I order things online all the time. Should our neighbors be suspicious of me? That's different. How? Explain to me exactly how it's different. Karen couldn't quite meet his eyes. You've lived here for 20 years. People know you. So it's not the behavior that's suspicious. It's that they're new, they're unknown. Don't you dare make this about race, Karen snapped, her cheeks flushing. This is about protecting our community. Richard stared at her for a long moment. Do you hear yourself? You sound paranoid. He checked his watch. I'm going to change and head to the club for a swim. Maybe you should take the night off from neighborhood watch duty. As he climbed the stairs, Karen reopened her laptop, her resolve hardening. Richard didn't understand because he was never home anymore. He didn't see what she saw. Across the street, Zara sat on her new patio furniture, delivered that afternoon, under Karen Whitfield's distant but unmistakable observation, and tried to focus on her novel. Marcus was inside on a call with a client in Tokyo, and the evening was pleasantly cool, perfect for reading outside. Perfect if she could shake the sensation of being evaluated, judged, suspected. Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Desiree. How's life in the white suburbs? Burning sage daily to cleanse the vibes. Despite her mood, Zara smiled. Desiree had been vocally skeptical about the move to Oakwood Heights. Mostly fine. House is coming together. Got the concerned neighbor watching my every move, though. The reply came quickly. Of course you do. What's her name? Karen? Zara's eyes widened. Literally, yes. How did you know? Lucky guess, don't let her get to you. You earned that house. Make her uncomfortable with your excellence. Zara set down her phone, Desiree's words echoing in her mind. She had earned this, the house, the promotion, the life she'd built, with Marcus. Yet here she was, feeling like an imposter on her own property because one woman couldn't conceive of her belonging here. The sensation was achingly familiar. The same tight feeling in her chest when security followed her in high-end stores. The same forced smile when colleagues expressed surprise at her credentials. The same internal mantra. I belong here. I earned this space. As darkness fell, she noticed a car slow as it passed her house. Karen Whitfield's sedan, the dome light illuminating her profile as she peered toward Zara's porch. Enough, Zara thought suddenly. Whatever game this woman was playing, she refused to be made a pawn in it. Tomorrow she would call the security company and have cameras installed. Documentation worked both ways. Olivia Whitfield sat cross-legged on her bed, textbooks spread around her, but her focus kept drifting to the muffled sounds of her parents arguing downstairs. They'd been doing that more often lately, usually about her mother's community involvement or her father's increasing absence. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Mia. Did you see that TikTok about the woman who called the cops on those black kids having a lemonade stand? Your mom energy TBH, Olivia winced. Not funny. She's been stalking our new neighbors and taking pictures. No way, seriously? Yes way. It's so embarrassing. They seem totally normal. Classic white lady moves. What are you going to do? Olivia stared at the question for a long moment. IDK. Try to talk sense into her, I guess. But even as she typed the words, Olivia doubted they would make any difference. Her mother saw what she wanted to see, heard what she wanted to hear. The argument downstairs had stopped. Moments later, Olivia heard the front door close as her father left again, rather than continuing the confrontation. Her mother's footsteps ascended the stairs, pausing outside Olivia's door. Olivia, are you studying? Yes, Mom. She quickly flipped open her history textbook. The door opened without a knock. Karen leaned against the doorframe, her expression a forced cheerfulness that didn't reach her eyes. I'm making a cup of tea. Would you like one? No thanks. I've got a lot to cover before tomorrow. Karen nodded, lingering. I know you think I'm overreacting about the new neighbors. The Washingtons, Olivia interrupted, deliberately using their name. That's their name, Mom. Not the new neighbors or those people. Fine, the Washingtons, Karen conceded with an edge to her voice. I know you think I'm being unfair, but when you're older, you'll understand that sometimes protecting a community means asking uncomfortable questions, being vigilant. Olivia set down her highlighter, meeting her mother's gaze directly. What exactly are you protecting us from, Mom? A successful black couple who bought a nice house? Who get packages delivered just like everyone else in this century? There have been thefts. So you assume it's them? Based on what evidence? Karen's face hardened. You don't understand how the world works, Olivia. How communities change. How quickly things can deteriorate. I understand enough to know what racism looks like, Olivia said, the words escaping before she could reconsider. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's face drained of color, then flushed with anger. I have never raised you to throw around accusations like that. Never. I am not a racist. I am a concerned citizen who cares about this community more than most people seem to anymore. Her voice shook slightly. Including your father, apparently. And now you, Mom. No, I don't want to hear it. Finish your studying. We'll talk when you're ready to show some respect. The door closed with a decisive click, not quite a slam, but carrying the same emotional weight. Olivia stared at her textbook, the words blurring as unexpected tears welled. The worst part wasn't her mother's anger or even her surveillance of the Washingtons. It was the growing realization that the woman who had raised her, who had taught her to be kind, to be fair, to Judge people on their actions rather than their appearances. Couldn't see the contradiction in her own behavior. The next morning, Karen woke earlier than usual, her conversation with Olivia still echoing in her mind. Racist. The accusation stung precisely because Karen had always prided herself on being fair-minded. Richard had already left for work, earlier than usual, avoiding another confrontation. Typical. When things got difficult, Richard retreated to his office, to the golf course, to anywhere but home. Karen slipped into her walking shoes and a light jacket. The Washington's first package typically arrived between 9:30 and 10:01, but UPS occasionally came earlier. She was halfway down her driveway when she noticed the UPS truck already turning onto their street, much earlier than normal. Karen quickened her pace, timing her walk to coincide with the truck's stop at the Washington house. The driver left a large box, bigger than anything delivered previously, and Karen felt a surge of validation. Quickly, she snapped several photos of the box sitting on the porch. From this distance, she could actually read the label, custom countertops, fragile. Countertops? Karen frowned slightly. That seemed like a legitimate renovation purchase. But still, the pattern of deliveries remained suspicious. She continued her walk, circling the block twice before returning home. By then, the package was gone. Karen checked the time, 7:42 a.m., and made a note in her log. Earlier retrieval than usual. Were they adapting to avoid detection? Inside, she sent a group text to Patricia and Jeffrey. Large delivery this morning, 7:30 a.m., retrieved quickly. Keep eyes open for more today. By late afternoon, 2 more packages had been delivered to the Washington house. 3 deliveries in one day, exactly the pattern Karen had documented for the past week. She sat at her desk, organizing her notes and photographs, preparing for her meeting with Officer Reynolds tomorrow. The evidence was circumstantial, she knew, but compelling when viewed in its entirety. Karen was so absorbed in her task that she didn't hear Olivia come home, didn't notice her standing in the doorway until she spoke. "Mom, what are you doing?" Karen looked up, caught between shame and defensiveness at being discovered. "Organizing. My notes for the neighborhood watch. Officer Reynolds needs to be informed about our neighbors getting deliveries." Olivia stepped into the room. "This has to stop, Mom. You're literally stalking them." "I am documenting suspicious behavior," Karen corrected, her voice rising. "And what? Black people can't afford to order things online? They have to be thieves?" Olivia's voice cracked slightly. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? How wrong?" "You're 16, Olivia. You don't understand how the world works." "I understand enough to know this isn't normal." Olivia gestured to the photographs spread across the desk. "Taking pictures of our neighbors? Logging when they get mail? Following them? This is harassment, Mom. This isn't about the community. This is about you." Olivia was shouting now, tears in her eyes. "You can't stand that Dad's never home, that your real estate career tanked, that you don't have anything but this made-up neighborhood patrol. So you're targeting the new black family because they're an easy target, because they make you feel important when you report on them." Karen recoiled as if slapped. "That is completely untrue. I have documented evidence." "Of what?" "People getting packages. That's not a crime, Mom." Olivia backed toward the door, her expression hardening. "If you go to the police with this, if you keep harassing them, I swear I will never forgive you." The door slammed behind her, leaving Karen alone with her evidence and the uncomfortable weight of her daughter's words. Karen gathered her materials into a folder. Tomorrow she would speak with Officer Reynolds, present her evidence calmly, rationally. She glanced out the window toward the Washington house where all 3 packages had already disappeared inside. No matter what Olivia said, no matter what Richard thought, Karen couldn't ignore the suspicion growing within her. 3 large packages in one day. What more proof did she need? The decision crystallized in her mind. Tomorrow wasn't soon enough. The next delivery, whenever it came, she would confront Zara Washington directly. Document the interaction. Get answers once and for all. Oakwood Heights was her community, her responsibility, and she would protect it. no matter what anyone thought of her methods. The morning arrived with a rare spring downpour, rain drumming against windows and washing the streets clean. Karen Whitfield stood at her kitchen window, coffee cooling, beside her, watching as the UPS truck made its way down the street, windshield wipers working furiously against the deluge. As predicted, it stopped in front of the Washington house. Karen checked the time. 9:47 a.m. She'd been right about their delivery schedule. The driver hurried through the rain, leaving a large package protected under the Washington's covered porch. Her phone was already in her hand, the neighborhood watch group text ready. Another delivery. Large box. Will investigate. Patricia replied instantly. Be careful. Weather's nasty. Jeffrey chimed in. Keep us posted. Karen tucked her phone into her pocket, slipped on a raincoat, and grabbed her umbrella. Her heart hammered in her chest, an unpleasant mixture of nervousness and righteous determination. Today, she would get answers. Today, she would confirm what she already knew, that the Washingtons weren't just new residents. They were a threat to the community she'd spent 20 years protecting. She left through the side door, avoiding Olivia, who was in her room, still, barely speaking to her since their argument. Richard had already left for work hours ago, as usual. Rain pelted her umbrella as she crossed the street, phone camera already recording in her pocket. A simple conversation, she told herself. Simple questions requiring simple answers. If the Washingtons had nothing to hide, they would understand her concerns. Karen had timed it perfectly. Just as she reached the Washingtons' walkway, Zara emerged. From the front door, dressed for work in a tailored blue suit, car keys in hand. Spotting the package, Zara diverted toward it, seemingly unaware of Karen's approach. Good morning, Zara, Karen called out, her voice carrying over the rain. Zara straightened, obviously startled. Her expression shifted from surprise to wariness as she recognized Karen. Mrs. Whitfield, she responded, formal and reserved. Karen moved closer, positioning herself between Zara and the package. I couldn't help but notice you've received another delivery. Yes, Zara said simply, glancing at her watch. If you'll excuse me, I'm running late for work. This must be your 15th package this month, Karen pressed, pulling out her phone, now openly recording. I've been keeping track. It's an unusual number of deliveries, don't you think? Zara's posture stiffened, her gaze dropping, to the phone in Karen's hand, then back to Karen's face. I don't think my deliveries are any of your concern. As the neighborhood watch captain, any suspicious activity is my concern, Karen replied, her voice rising slightly. And with the recent package thefts in the area, are you accusing me of something? Zara asked, her voice level but edged with steel. I'm simply asking what's in all these packages. It's a reasonable question given the circumstances. No, it's not reasonable and I don't answer to you, Zara replied, stepping forward to retrieve her package. Now please get off my property. Karen didn't budge. If you have nothing to hide, I have nothing to prove to you, Zara interrupted, her calm demeanor still intact, though a muscle twitched in her jaw. Move aside. Something in Zara's refusal to explain herself, to acknowledge Karen's authority, sparked a deeper anger. Didn't she understand that Karen was protecting everyone? That these questions were for the good of Oakwood Heights? I think the police might be interested in your unusual delivery patterns, especially given the timing of the thefts, Karen said, her finger already navigating to the emergency dial pad on her phone. You're calling the police because I received a package? Zara asked, incredulous. A package delivered to my house with my name on it? I'm calling them because you're being evasive and suspicious, Karen responded, the camera still recording. Someone has been stealing packages in this neighborhood since you moved in. It's my responsibility to report suspicious behavior. Zara's expression hardened, a flash of something hurt, anger, fear, crossing her features before she controlled it. Let me be very clear, Mrs. Whitfield. You are harassing me on my own property. You're filming me without consent, and now you're making unfounded accusations based on nothing but your own prejudice. This has nothing to do with... With what? Zara challenged, taking a step closer. Say it. Tell me exactly what this is about. Karen's finger hovered over the call button. This is about community safety. Period. No, this is about you not believing I belong here, Zara said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. This is about you deciding that because I'm black and new to the neighborhood, I must be a criminal, and I'm not going to stand here in the rain and beg you to see my humanity. Karen's finger pressed the call button, her own outrage rising to match Zara's. 911, what's your emergency? Came the dispatcher's voice. Yes, hello, this is Karen Whitfield in Oakwood Heights. I'm the neighborhood watch captain, and I believe I've identified the person responsible for our recent package thefts. I'm at 472 Oakwood Circle. I need an officer immediately. Zara stared at her in disbelief. You can't be serious. Ma'am, what evidence do you have of theft? The dispatcher asked. Suspicious behavior. Unusual delivery patterns coinciding with the thefts and a refusal to explain these patterns when questioned, Karen replied, keeping her eyes locked on Zara. Is this person currently in possession of stolen property? That's what I'm trying to determine, but she's being evasive. The dispatcher's voice took on a more measured tone. Ma'am, I'll send an officer, but please maintain a safe distance and do not engage further. I'll stay right here, Karen confirmed, ending the call but keeping the camera rolling. Zara took a deep breath, visible anger simmering beneath her controlled exterior. You just called the police on me for standing on my own porch trying to collect my own package. If they're legitimately your packages, you have nothing to worry about, Karen replied. You have no idea the danger you just put me in, Zara said, her voice tight. No idea. The confrontation had drawn attention. Across the street, curtains twitched. A neighbor walking his dog had stopped, eyeing the scene, uncertainly. Down the block, Helen Chen emerged from her house, evidently having observed the situation developing. Zara? Helen called, approaching quickly under a bright red umbrella. Is everything okay? No, everything is not okay, Zara replied, her eyes still locked on Karen. Mrs. Whitfield here has decided I'm a thief and called the police because I received a package. Helen's gaze darted between them, comprehension dawning. Karen, what are you doing? My job, Karen said firmly. Someone has to look out for this neighborhood. By harassing our new neighbors? Helen asked, positioning herself slightly closer to Zara. This is completely inappropriate. You don't have all the facts, Helen, Karen replied, the camera still trained on Zara. There's been a pattern. Deliveries every day, sometimes multiple times, all coinciding exactly with the package thefts. More neighbors had emerged now. Jeffrey Henderson from 2 doors down, the Millers from across the street, an elderly couple Karen didn't immediately recognize. The audience only strengthened her resolve. They needed to see that someone was taking action, protecting their community. The distant wail of a police siren cut through the rain. You should call Marcus, Helen said quietly to Zara, who nodded, pulling out her phone. Already texting him, she replied, her fingers moving rapidly across the screen. Karen felt a flicker of unease as she registered the growing tension in the small crowd. The Millers were watching her with obvious disapproval. Jeffrey Henderson looked uncertain, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Only Mrs. Abernathy from the end of the block seemed supportive, her arms crossed and expression pinched as she glared at Zara. But it was too late to back down now. She had called the police. She had evidence. She would be vindicated when they saw the pattern she'd documented. The police cruiser pulled up, and Officer James Reynolds emerged, taking in the scene with a practiced eye, the small crowd of neighbors, Karen with her phone outstretched, Zara standing tensely beside a package on her own porch, Helen nearby with a supportive hand now on Zara's arm. Officer Reynolds, Karen called out, stepping toward him. I've documented suspicious delivery patterns that coincide perfectly with the neighborhood package thefts. Mrs. Washington here refuses to explain why she's receiving so many packages or what's in them. Reynolds approached cautiously, his expression neutral. Mrs. Whitfield, I need you to lower your phone and step back, please. I'm documenting this interaction for safety purposes, Karen replied, keeping the camera raised. Ma'am, please lower the phone and step back to the sidewalk, Reynolds repeated, his tone firmer. Karen reluctantly lowered the phone but continued recording as she retreated a few steps. Reynolds turned to Zara. Ma'am, I understand there's been a complaint about suspicious deliveries. Can you tell me what's happening here? Zara's voice was steady, though Karen noticed her hands trembling slightly. I was leaving for work when I saw that a package had been delivered. Mrs. Whitfield approached me, demanded to know what was in it, and when I told her it wasn't her business, she called the police and accused me of theft. The package is addressed to you? Reynolds asked. Yes. All of our deliveries are. We moved in 3 weeks ago and we're renovating. That's why we're receiving frequent deliveries. Furniture, fixtures, supplies. Reynolds nodded, his posture relaxing slightly. May I see the shipping label on this package? Of course, Zara replied, turning toward the box. Watch her, Karen called out suddenly. She might be reaching for something. The atmosphere instantly electrified. Reynolds's hand instinctively moved toward his hip, his body tensing as he reassessed the situation. Zara froze, her eyes widening as she slowly raised her hands, palms outward. I'm just going to show him the shipping label, she said carefully, her voice tight with fear. The moment hung suspended, rain falling around them, neighbors watching in stunned silence. Karen felt a surge of vindication. Her warning had been appropriate, necessary. Reynolds needed to be cautious, but the officer's expression had darkened. Mrs. Whitfield, I need you to step back to the street now. Stop recording and step back. But now, ma'am. Something in his tone made Karen comply, though she kept the recording running. Reynolds turned back to Zara, his posture deliberately relaxed now. Ma'am, I apologize. Please show me the shipping label at your convenience. Zara slowly lowered her hands, visibly shaken, and turned the package to display the label. It's addressed to me, Zara Washington, 472 Oakwood Circle. Reynolds examined it briefly and nodded. Thank you. Officer, Helen Chen interjected, stepping forward with her phone. I have something that might help. Zara shared the contractor's renovation schedule and delivery timeline with the HOA, as required for major projects. I have the email here with all the expected deliveries for their kitchen remodel. Karen felt a jolt of disbelief. You knew about the deliveries? Of course I knew, Helen replied coolly. As HOA president, I approve all major renovation plans. The Washingtons have been completely transparent about their project. But the thefts have been occurring 2 streets over, Reynolds finished for her, primarily on Magnolia Lane and Cedar Court. None on this street at all. The ground seemed to shift beneath Karen's feet. But the timing is coincidental, Reynolds said firmly. Mrs. Washington, do you want to press harassment charges? The question hung in the rain-drenched air. Karen's heart hammered in her chest as she realized how drastically the situation had turned. Harassment charges? Criminal charges against her? Zara studied Karen for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she shook her head. Not at this time. But I want this incident documented, and I want it clearly stated that I was wrongfully accused. Reynolds nodded, pulling out his notepad despite the rain. I'll take statements from both of you. From down the street came the sound of tires skidding to a halt. Marcus Washington emerged from his car, face tight with concern as he rushed toward them. Zara! I'm okay, she called back, though the tremor in her voice suggested otherwise. Marcus reached her side, placing a protective arm around her shoulders, as he assessed the situation. What's happening here? Mrs. Whitfield called the police because I received a package, Zara explained quietly. Accused me of being the neighborhood package thief. Marcus's expression hardened as he turned to Karen. You did what? There was a pattern, Karen began, but Reynolds intervened. Sir, I'm handling the situation. Your wife has declined to press charges at this time, but I'm documenting the incident. Charges? Marcus repeated, incredulous. She should be arrested for harassment, for false reporting, for... Marcus, Zara said softly, touching his arm. Not now. The quiet intimacy of the moment struck Karen, Zara calming her husband, the gentle touch, the shared look of understanding. A family protecting each other, like she was trying to protect Oakwood Heights. But something had gone terribly wrong. The neighbors were watching her now, not the Washingtons. Their expressions ranged from confusion to outright condemnation. Mrs. Miller shook her head slowly. Jeffrey Henderson wouldn't meet her eyes. Even Mrs. Abernathy looked uncertain now. Only Helen Chen's gaze remained steady, a mixture of disappointment and something like pity that made Karen's skin crawl. "I was doing my job," Karen said, her voice sounding thin even to her own ears. "As neighborhood watch captain," which is not an official position, Reynolds pointed out. The Neighborhood Watch is a community initiative without legal authority to question, detain, or surveil residents. Karen felt her cheeks burning despite the cool rain. "The safety of this neighborhood will be handled by the proper authorities," Reynolds finished firmly. "Now I need statements from both parties." As Reynolds began taking Zara's statement, Karen noticed a flash of movement from her own house. Olivia stood in the upstairs window, watching the scene unfold, her expression a mixture of horror and disgust that felt like a physical blow. Karen's phone continued recording in her hand, capturing a moment she had imagined would be her vindication, but had instead become her humiliation. The evidence she'd thought would prove the Washingtons didn't belong had only proven how desperately she needed them not to. When Reynolds finally finished taking statements and the crowd began to disperse, Karen remained rooted to the spot, rain seeping through her coat as she watched Zara and Marcus carry the package, containing bathroom light fixtures according to the statement, into their home. Before closing the door, Zara paused, meeting Karen's gaze across the yard. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. "You tried to make me feel like an intruder, but I belong here. Deal with it." The door closed with quiet finality. Karen stood alone in the rain, phone still recording, uncertain what to do with the evidence she'd gathered against herself. "I know what's really happening in Oakwood Heights," she finally murmured to the camera, her voice barely audible over the rain. "And I'm going to make sure everyone else does too." She ended the recording and walked home, already composing the social media post that would tell her side of the story. The side where she was the protector, not the aggressor. The side where her concerns were validated, not exposed as prejudice. The side where Oakwood Heights remained unchanged, exactly as she needed it to be. Karen stared at her phone, refreshing the screen with trembling fingers. 12 hours since she'd posted the edited video to her neighborhood safety group, meticulously trimmed to remove Officer Reynolds' confirmation that the packages belonged to Zara. 8 hours since a local community page had shared it. 4 hours since it had been picked up by a national account dedicated to documenting entitled behaviors. The view count, 2.4 million and climbing. The comment section was a battleground, mostly condemning her actions but with enough supporters to reinforce her conviction that she'd done nothing wrong. She'd spent the night alternating between defending herself and blocking the most vicious attackers. The front door opened and closed. Olivia, home from school early. "Mom?" Her voice echoed from the hallway. Karen quickly closed the social media app. "In the kitchen, sweetheart." Olivia appeared in the doorway, her face pale, eyes rimmed with red. She'd been crying. "What happened?" Karen asked, instantly concerned. "Am I sick?" Olivia repeated, incredulous. "The whole school saw the video, Mom, everyone. They're calling our house Karen Central. Someone stuck printouts of your face on my locker with racist written across it." Karen flinched. "That's completely inappropriate. We should call the principal." "Don't you dare," Olivia snapped. "Don't make this worse by trying to get involved." Her voice broke. "Do you have any idea what you've done? What it's like to be your daughter right now?" "I was protecting our community," Karen said, the justification sounding hollow even to her own ears. "You were harassing our neighbors because they're black," Olivia interrupted, "and now the whole world knows it." "That's not fair," Karen protested. "It had nothing to do with race." "Stop it!" Olivia slammed her hand on the counter, tears streaming down her face. I've seen the unedited video that Mr. Peterson posted. You know, the one that shows Officer Reynolds confirming the packages were legitimately theirs. The one that shows you yelling that Mrs. Washington might be reaching for something when she was just trying to show a shipping label. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? Karen felt the blood drain from her face. Mr. Peterson posted what video? His security camera caught the whole thing, Olivia said, wiping angrily at her tears. And he posted it because he said your version was manipulatively edited. He's right, isn't he? You cut out the parts that made you look bad. Karen's phone pinged with another notification, then another, and another. A cascade of alerts that suggested something had shifted in the online narrative. I need to check something, she mumbled, opening the app again. There it was. A new video posted by Thomas Peterson, their neighbor from the corner house. Security camera footage capturing the entire confrontation from a different angle, including Officer Reynolds confirming the packages belonged to Zara and Helen, providing the delivery schedule documentation. The comments had evolved. Wow, she edited out all the parts that proved she was wrong. That's next-level Karen behavior. Did you hear her yell she might be reaching for something? She was trying to get that woman shot. Karen set the phone down, her hands suddenly clammy. I need to lie down, she said quietly. Yeah, hide, Olivia replied bitterly. That's what Dad does too. I'm going to Maya's house. At least her mom isn't internet famous for racism. The front door slammed, leaving Karen alone with the relentless ping of notifications, each one another voice joining the chorus of condemnation. Across the street, Zara Washington sat on her living room floor, back against the sofa, laptop balanced on her knees. The curtains were drawn against the news vans parked along the street and the steady stream of slow-driving cars. Her phone rang the 14th call from an unknown number that hour. She declined it without looking. You can't stay on the floor forever, Marcus said softly, sitting beside her. I know, she replied, not looking up from her screen. But the sofa feels too exposed even with the curtains closed. Marcus's jaw tightened. This is exactly why we need to pursue legal action. Invasion of privacy, harassment, defamation. And extend this nightmare for months? Zara interrupted, finally meeting his eyes. Have our names in the news cycle for the next year? Be defined by this moment forever? We're already defined by it, Marcus said gently. That's not our choice anymore. But how we respond is. Zara turned back to her laptop, scrolling through the hundreds of messages flooding her social media accounts. For every supportive comment, there were vicious attacks. Why don't you go back to where you came from if you can't handle neighborhood watch? Playing the race card when you get caught. Typical. And worse, much worse. I took emergency leave. From work, Zara said quietly. Sandra called this morning. Apparently the office has been flooded with calls. People trying to get me fired, people demanding I receive protection, reporters asking for statements. It's disrupting business. I'm sorry, Marcus whispered, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. I just wanted a home, Marcus, she whispered. A nice home in a good neighborhood with good schools for our future children. That's it, that's all I wanted. I know, Z. And now we're trapped here. If we leave, she wins, proves we don't belong. If we stay, we're the perpetual black family from the video. Never just neighbors, never just people. The doorbell rang, making them both flinch. I'll get it, Marcus said, rising to his feet. He returned moments later with Helen Chen, who looked nearly as exhausted as Zara felt. I'm so sorry to bother you, Helen said, perching awkwardly on the edge of the sofa. I wanted to check on you before the meeting tonight. We're managing, Zara replied diplomatically. Helen nodded. The situation has escalated beyond anything I could have anticipated. The neighborhood is divided. Some residents are demanding Karen's removal from all community positions. Others are defending her actions as appropriate vigilance. And where do you stand, Helen? Marcus asked, his tone neutral, but his gaze intense. Helen met his eyes directly. What Karen did was wrong. Unequivocally wrong. The board will be issuing a formal statement condemning her actions tonight. Zara felt a small measure of tension release from her shoulders. Thank you. Don't thank me for basic decency, Helen said with a grimace. I should have stepped in sooner. I noticed the pattern but didn't say anything, didn't want to create conflict. My own cowardice contributed to this situation. After Helen left, Zara's phone rang again. Another unknown number. As she declined it, a text message appeared from a childhood friend. Just saw the video. Are you okay? Call me. We should get ready for the HOA meeting, Marcus said, glancing at his watch. Zara nodded, finally rising from her place on the floor. As she moved to the window, she carefully peered through a crack in the curtains. The news vans were still there. A small group of strangers stood on the sidewalk, some holding phones. I'll wear the blue dress, she said decisively, and my good earrings. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Any particular reason? If I'm going to be stared at by the entire neighborhood, Zara explained, I'm going to look absolutely flawless while they do it. Richard Whitfield sat in his office, door closed, blinds drawn, staring at his computer screen in disbelief. The email from his supervisor was brief but devastating. Richard, in light of recent events involving your family that have gained public attention, I believe we should discuss your client-facing responsibilities. Please come to my office at 3 p.m. today. Edward. He loosened his tie, feeling suddenly short of breath. The promotion he'd worked 70-hour weeks to secure was now in jeopardy because Karen couldn't mind her own business. His phone buzzed with a text from Olivia, at Maya's house, not coming home tonight. A knock at his door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Come in, he called, straightening in his chair. His colleague James Parker entered. Hey, Rich, wanted to check in. You doing okay? Richard forced a professional smile. Fine, thanks. Just busy with the Henderson account. James hesitated. Look, I don't want to overstep, but everyone's seen the video. Your wife's video. It's all over social media, and some of the client service team members are worried. I appreciate the concern, Richard replied stiffly, but my family matters are separate from my professional responsibilities. Of course, James agreed quickly. But well, the Washingtons. He's an attorney with Becker Harris, isn't he? We have collaborative agreements with them on the West Side Development Project. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. Marcus Washington works for Becker Harris. Senior associate, James confirmed. Lisa in legal recognized him from the joint meeting last month. After James left, Richard stared blankly at his computer screen. Not only was Karen's video threatening his professional standing, but she'd specifically targeted the family of a colleague at a partner firm. His phone buzzed again. A text from Karen. Coming home early? Need support. Internet trolls attacking me. Richard set the phone down without replying. It was time to face reality and have the conversation he'd been avoiding for years. The Oakwood Heights Community Center was filled beyond capacity, folding chairs hastily arranged in rows, residents standing along the walls when seating ran out. The emergency HOA meeting had drawn nearly every household in the neighborhood. Helen Chen stood at the front, gavel in hand, trying to maintain order as raised voices competed for attention. One at a time, please, she called out, tapping the gavel on the podium. We need to address this situation with civility. Civility? Patricia Lawson scoffed from the third row. Like the civility Karen showed when she interrogated the Washingtons on their own property. Karen was doing her job as neighborhood watch captain, Jeffrey Henderson countered from across the aisle. The thefts are real. The timing was suspicious. Any responsible community member would have asked questions. Questions, yes. Harassment and calling the police, no, Mrs. Miller retorted. And then editing the video to make herself look justified? That's deliberate manipulation. The debate had been raging for 20 minutes when Zara and Marcus Washington entered, Zara resplendent in a cobalt blue dress, chin held high as she surveyed the crowd. Without speaking, they made their way to two empty seats in the front row, directly across from where Karen sat with Patricia and Jeffrey, Richard noticeably absent. Helen cleared her throat. Now that we have most of the involved parties present, I'd like to outline the board's position. The events of yesterday morning represent a serious breach of community standards and neighborly conduct. The HOA board has unanimously voted to issue a formal statement condemning harassment within our community and to remove Karen Whitfield from her position as Neighborhood Watch Coordinator, effective immediately. A mixture of applause and protesting murmurs filled the room. That's completely unfair, Patricia objected. Karen has dedicated years to keeping this neighborhood safe. Safe for whom? Marcus asked, his voice cutting through the noise. Because from where we're sitting, her actions made this neighborhood actively dangerous for my wife. Karen rose to her feet, trembling visibly. I was trying to protect everyone. The thefts are real. The timing coincided perfectly with your arrival and your unusual number of deliveries. Any reasonable person would have been suspicious. Any reasonable person would have minded their own business, Zara replied evenly. Any reasonable person would have recognized that new homeowners renovating might receive packages. Any reasonable person would not have created a surveillance log of their neighbors or photographed them without consent. I didn't know about the renovation plans, Karen insisted. But Helen did, Marcus pointed out. Because we followed proper procedures and submitted them to the HOA, you could have asked her instead of stalking my wife. I wasn't stalking. You monitored our deliveries, documented our movements, photographed Zara without consent, confronted her on our property, called the police with false accusations, and yelled that she might be reaching for something. When she was showing a shipping label to an officer, Marcus enumerated, his professional courtroom tone making the action sound all the more damning. That's harassment, potentially criminal. Are you threatening legal action? Jeffrey asked, standing beside Karen in solidarity. We're considering all options, Marcus replied diplomatically. But what we want most is acknowledgement of the harm caused and genuine steps to ensure nothing like this happens again, to us or anyone else. Helen nodded. That's precisely why the board has drafted a community commitment pledge and new guidelines for neighborhood security initiatives. All residents will be asked to sign this commitment to respecting privacy, avoiding profiling, and following proper channels for reporting genuine concerns. This is absurd, Karen protested. We're being asked to apologize for wanting to maintain the standards and safety of our community. No, Karen, Helen corrected firmly. You're being asked to acknowledge that your actions were harmful and discriminatory. The rest of us are being asked to commit to doing better. An elderly man in the back raised his hand. When Helen acknowledged him, he stood slowly, leaning on a cane. I've lived in Oakwood Heights for 42 years, he began. I've seen this neighborhood change, seen families come and go, and I've seen how we sometimes resist those changes. When the Chens moved in 20 years ago, there were people who watched them too, who whispered about property values and community character, who questioned whether they belonged. He nodded toward Helen. Now our HOA president is Chinese, American, and we're better for it. I watched that video, the old man continued. And I saw myself 30 years ago, when I objected to the Jacksons moving in down the street. Black families, successful, good people. But I was afraid of change, afraid of difference. I was wrong then. And Karen, you're wrong now. It takes courage to admit it. I hope you find that courage. The man sat down, and the room remained silent for several heartbeats. Mr. Dernier is right, Helen said finally. This isn't just about one incident. It's about the kind of community we want to be. As the meeting continued with procedural details, Karen slipped out, unable to bear the collective judgment any longer. On her way through the parking lot, she passed Richard, arriving late from work, his expression grim. How bad is it? He asked. They've crucified me, she replied bitterly. Removed me from the neighborhood watch, made me into a monster. Richard's jaw tightened. I've been called to a meeting with the senior partners. My position is in jeopardy. Olivia won't come home. Our family is falling apart, Karen. So you're blaming me too? She asked incredulously. I'm saying we need to face reality, Richard replied. What you did was wrong, deeply wrong, and it's time to take responsibility for that. I was protecting our community, Karen insisted, tears forming. No, Richard said firmly. You were protecting your sense of control, your need to feel important, your fear of change, and it's cost us everything. Zara and Marcus walked home from the meeting in silence, the evening air heavy with humidity that promised rain. Reporters called out questions as they approached, their house, cameras flashing in the gathering darkness. No comment, Marcus stated firmly, guiding Zara up the walkway. Inside, Zara kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief. That was exactly as awful as I expected. But productive, Marcus pointed out. The HOA took decisive action. Most of the neighbors seemed supportive. Most, Zara echoed. But not all. Did you see Patricia's face? Jeffrey's? There are still people who think Karen was justified. There always will be, Marcus said gently. But they're outnumbered now. That matters. Zara sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. What happens now? The news cycle will move on eventually, but we still live across from them. We'll still see her every day. One day at a time, Marcus advised, sitting beside her. Tonight we rest. Tomorrow we decide how we want to proceed, legally, practically, emotionally. Zara's phone chimed with a text notification. She glanced at it, then sat up straighter. It's from Helen, she said, scanning the message. Officer Reynolds' body camera footage has been released to media outlets. It'll probably be online by morning. Marcus took her hand. That's good, right? It shows exactly what happened. Unedited. It shows me terrified, Zara whispered. It shows me having to perform perfect composure while a white woman tries to criminalize me for existing in my own space. It shows your strength, Marcus corrected. Your dignity under unimaginable pressure. I don't want to be strong, Zara admitted, tears finally breaking through the composure she'd maintained all day. I don't want to be dignified. I just want to be allowed to live my life without becoming a symbol, a hashtag, another black person who survived an encounter that could have ended tragically. Marcus pulled her close, his own eyes damp. I know, Z. I know. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows. Across the street, lights burned in the Whitfield home, silhouettes moving behind drawn curtains, another family grappling with the consequences of a moment that had changed everything. Between them, the rain-slicked pavement of Oakwood Circle gleamed under streetlights, both a dividing line and a path, one that would soon be crossed in an unexpected way. The coffee shop on the edge of Oakwood Heights had become Zara's refuge in the week since the incident. Located just far enough from the neighborhood to avoid curious stares, yet close enough for a quick escape home if needed. Here, she could almost pretend to be anonymous again. She tucked herself into a corner table with her back to the wall, reviewing a campaign proposal on her laptop, when movement at the entrance caught her attention. A teenage girl hesitated in the doorway, scanning the shop with nervous energy. Olivia Whitfield. Zara's pulse quickened. She hadn't seen any of the Whitfields since the HOA meeting 5 days ago. Had purposely varied her schedule to avoid chance encounters. Before Zara could move, Olivia's gaze landed on her. Recognition flashed across the girl's face, followed by something like resolve. Mrs. Washington? Olivia's voice was barely audible above the coffee shop ambience. I'm Olivia Whitfield, Karen's daughter. She swallowed hard. Could I talk to you for a minute? Please? The girl's hands were trembling, Zara noticed. Her eyes were shadowed with fatigue, her posture tense with anticipation of rejection. Against her better judgment, Zara nodded at the empty chair across from her. Have a seat, Olivia. Relief washed over the teenager's face. She slid into the chair, hands clasped tightly together on the table. Thank you. I wasn't sure you'd even speak to me. You're not your mother, Zara replied simply. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. I need to apologize for what she did. I know it doesn't change anything, but I want you to know that not everyone in our family thinks like her. The earnestness in the girl's voice caught Zara off guard. She'd expected many things in the aftermath of the incident: legal discussions, neighborhood tension, media attention. But not this. Not a teenager with her mother's features but none of her hardness, reaching across a divide with such obvious sincerity. I appreciate that, Olivia. But you don't need to apologize for something you didn't do. But I didn't stop it either, Olivia countered, guilt flashing across her face. I knew she was watching your house. I saw her taking pictures. I told her it was wrong, but I didn't. Her voice caught. I didn't try hard enough. You're 16, right? It's not your job to manage your mother's behavior. But I should have done more, Olivia insisted. The thing is, she wasn't always like this. Or maybe she was, and I just didn't see it. But ever since Dad's promotion, since he's been working longer hours, she's gotten more and more obsessed with the neighborhood, with controlling everything she can since she can't control what's happening at home. Zara's gaze softened. Despite her resolve to maintain emotional distance, she found herself drawn to the teenager's vulnerability, her struggle to make sense of her family's unraveling. That doesn't excuse what she did, Zara said gently. No, it doesn't, Olivia agreed quickly. Nothing excuses it. I just thought maybe understanding why might help somehow. She's spiraling and none of us knows how to reach her. Can I ask you something? Why did you really come to find me today? Olivia's eyes welled with tears. Because I couldn't stand being in that house another minute pretending everything's normal. Because I'm ashamed of having her last name right now. Because... She wiped at her eyes. Because I want to believe people can be better than their worst moments, and I needed to see if you believed that too. The raw honesty pierced through Zara's careful defenses. She thought of her own mother, how she'd taught Zara that holding on to anger only burned the vessel that contained it. Would you like some hot chocolate? Zara asked, nodding toward the counter. I could use a refill. A tentative smile broke through Olivia's tears. Yes, please, that would be nice. While waiting for their drinks, Zara sent Marcus a quick text. You won't believe who I'm having coffee with right now. Karen's daughter, Olivia. She sought me out to apologize. When she returned to the table with their drinks, Olivia seemed more composed. Thank you. For the hot chocolate and for not kicking me out. You know, it takes courage to approach someone your mother hurt, Zara observed. Especially when the whole neighborhood is watching. Olivia traced the rim of her mug with her fingertip. Not as much courage as it took for you to stand your ground that day. They fell into a surprisingly comfortable conversation. Olivia shared her college aspirations, journalism at Northwestern like Helen Chen's son, and her growing interest in social justice issues. Can I ask you something personal? Olivia ventured after a while. You can ask. I might not answer. What's it like? Being one of the only black families in Oakwood Heights? Zara considered the question, appreciating its directness. Exhausting sometimes. You're always aware of being watched, being judged by different standards. The mental calculation of how to respond to microaggressions without being labeled angry or difficult. The constant need to prove you belong in spaces others take for granted. Like getting packages delivered without being accused of theft, Olivia said quietly. Exactly like that. I'm sorry, Olivia said again. I wish I could make her understand. Some people don't want to understand, Zara replied. Understanding would require changing beliefs they've built their identity around. Olivia nodded slowly. Like Mom with the neighborhood watch thing. It's like, after her real estate career tanked, being the protector of Oakwood Heights became her whole identity. Admitting she was wrong about you would mean questioning everything she believes about herself. The insight from someone so young struck Zara. That's a remarkably perceptive observation. Olivia shrugged. I've had a lot of time to think about it lately. I've been staying with my friend Maya most nights, can't really stand to be home. How are things with your father? Tense. He finally stood up to Mom after the HOA meeting, told her she needs professional help. They had this huge fight, and Dad's been sleeping in the guest room since. Olivia stared into her hot chocolate. I think he might leave if she doesn't get help. And the weird thing is, I'm not even sure I'd blame him. As they stood to leave, Olivia asked, would it be completely inappropriate if I hugged you? The question, so vulnerable in its directness, melted the last of Zara's reservations. Not inappropriate at all. The teenager's quick, fierce hug conveyed everything words couldn't. Remorse, gratitude, hope. Trevor Jackson crouched behind a hedge, watching as the FedEx driver left a package on the doorstep of 237 Magnolia Lane. The household was empty. He'd been monitoring long enough to know the owner's schedules. Both cars gone, no movement inside. Perfect. He waited another 5 minutes, ensuring no neighbors were watching, then casually approached the porch as if he belonged there. The package was light, probably clothing or something similarly unexciting, but he'd learned not to be picky. Package secured under his arm, Trevor strolled unhurriedly down the street toward the small gap in the hedge that separated Oakwood Heights from the adjacent, less affluent neighborhood where he lived. His mother would be upset if she knew what he was doing, but the past-due medical bills stacked on their kitchen counter left him little choice. He never took packages from houses with security cameras, never hit the same street twice in a row, and lately, he'd been careful to avoid the area around Oakwood Circle entirely. Too much attention after that video went viral. Ironic, Trevor thought, that a black family had been accused of his crimes when he himself was the neighborhood thief everyone was looking for. But he felt no guilt about it. The residents of Oakwood Heights had more than enough to spare. As he slipped through the hedge back to his own neighborhood, Trevor didn't notice Officer Reynolds' unmarked police car parked on a side street, or the officer himself documenting the theft with a telephoto lens. Richard Whitfield set his suitcase by the front door, his decision made after a sleepless night. The house was quiet. Karen was upstairs in her home office, where she'd been spending most of her time since the HOA meeting. He climbed the stairs, steeling himself for the conversation ahead. The door to the office was closed. He knocked once, then entered without waiting for a response. Karen sat at her desk scrolling through her phone. She barely glanced up. "You're home early." "I'm not staying," Richard said, his voice steady despite the turmoil he felt. "I've booked a hotel for the next week. After that, we'll need to discuss more permanent arrangements if things don't change." That got her attention. Karen's head snapped up, her expression cycling rapidly from shock to anger. "You're leaving me? Now? When everyone else has already turned against me?" "I'm giving you space to get the help you need," Richard corrected. "I've scheduled an appointment with Dr. Levinson. He's a therapist specializing in anxiety and identity issues." "I don't need therapy," Karen scoffed. "I need support from my husband when the entire community has decided to make me into a villain. For trying to protect them." Richard shook his head, a deep sadness replacing the anger he'd nursed for days. "Karen, you didn't protect anyone. You harassed our neighbors based on nothing but your own assumptions. You edited video evidence to make yourself look justified. You've refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing despite overwhelming evidence. And now our family is falling apart, my career is in jeopardy, and our daughter can't even stand to live in her own home. So this is an ultimatum?" Karen's voice rose. "Get therapy, or you'll leave me." "This is reality," Richard replied firmly. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine. I've been doing that for years, working longer hours to avoid the tension at home, ignoring the way you've become increasingly fixated on controlling the neighborhood as everything else in your life felt out of control. That ends now." Karen stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Acknowledge the harm you've caused, apologize sincerely to the Washingtons, get professional help, and start rebuilding who you are apart from being the self-appointed guardian of Oakwood Heights." Richard softened his tone. "The woman I married was kind, empathetic, excited about her career in real estate. I miss her. I think Olivia misses her too." "You make it sound so simple," Karen whispered, her defenses finally cracking. "Like I can just say sorry and everything goes back to normal." "It won't be simple or quick," Richard acknowledged, "but it has to start somewhere." He placed a business card on her desk. "Dr. Levinson, Tuesday at 2 p.m. I'll be there if you want me to." As he turned to leave, Karen asked in a small voice, "Is Olivia coming home?" "Not yet. She's staying with Maya's family for now." He paused in the doorway. She needs to see real change, Karen, we both do. Alone again, Karen picked up the therapist's card, turning it over in her fingers. The thought of admitting she needed help felt like surrendering her last shred of dignity. She was about to toss the card aside when her phone chimed with a text notification. Expecting another message from Patricia or Jeffrey, the only neighbors, still speaking to her, she was surprised to see Olivia's name. Might come home this weekend. Need to pick up more clothes and school stuff. A flicker of hope rose in Karen's chest. She quickly typed, "I'll be here. I've missed you." The three dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared as Olivia composed her response. "Okay. BTW, I talked to Zara Washington today. She was really nice. She didn't hate me for being your daughter." Karen stared at the text, reading it 3 times to be sure she understood. Olivia had talked to Zara Washington? Behind her back? The betrayal stung deeply, reigniting her defensive anger. She was about to type a furious response when a second text arrived. Maybe you could try talking to her too. Actually listening this time. Karen set the phone down, trembling with conflicting emotions. Her daughter, her own flesh and blood, was siding with the woman who had humiliated her, destroyed her reputation, torn apart her family. But a small voice inside her whispered that it was Karen herself who had initiated that destruction. She picked up Dr. Levinson's card again, her resistance weakening. Marcus listened intently as Zara recounted her coffee shop encounter with Olivia, his expression shifting from concern to surprise to thoughtful consideration. "So this teenager sought you out to apologize for her mother's actions?" he asked, still processing. "She did," Zara confirmed, "and she was genuinely remorseful." Marcus, not in a performative way but sincerely distressed about what happened and how it's affected everyone, including her own family. They sat on their patio, enjoying the first peaceful evening since the incident. The media vans had finally departed. 3 days ago, though occasional cars still drove by slowly, occupants hoping to glimpse the Karen video house. "That took courage," Marcus acknowledged, "approaching you, knowing how you might react." "She reminds me of my younger sister," Zara admitted. "That same idealism, the belief that honesty and good intentions can bridge any divide." She smiled, faintly. "It was refreshing, honestly. Healing in a way I didn't expect." Marcus took her hand. "Does this change how you feel about pursuing legal action?" Zara considered the question. "I'm not sure. Part of me still wants accountability, but another part wonders if dragging this through the courts would just prolong everyone's pain, including Olivia's." She looked at him questioningly. "What do you think?" Marcus had been the primary advocate for legal recourse, consulting with colleagues about potential claims. His expression now was contemplative. "I think," he said slowly, "that sometimes justice can take different forms. If Karen gets professional help, takes responsibility for her actions, and real community healing occurs, that might be more meaningful than a lawsuit." Their conversation was interrupted by Zara's phone ringing. Helen Chen's name appeared on the screen. "Helen, hi," Zara answered. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, relatively speaking," Helen replied. "I'm calling because I've been thinking about next steps for community healing. The HOA board is proposing a restorative justice circle, a moderated discussion where people can speak honestly about what happened and what needs to change going forward." "And you want us to participate?" Zara guessed. "Only if you're comfortable," Helen assured her. "This would be completely voluntary with professional facilitation. The idea is to move beyond punishment toward actual reconciliation, if possible." Zara glanced at Marcus, covering the mouthpiece. "Helen's proposing a community healing circle." She returned to the call. "Would Karen be there?" "Only if everyone agrees," Helen said carefully. "Richard called me today. Apparently he's given Karen an ultimatum about getting help, and he thinks a restorative process might be beneficial, but only with your consent. We wouldn't proceed otherwise." "Can I think about it?" Zara asked. "Discuss it with Marcus?" "Of course. Take all the time you need. And Zara, Thank you for even considering it. Many people in your position wouldn't. After ending the call, Zara relayed the proposal to Marcus. A restorative justice circle, he mused. That's actually not a bad idea. Creates a structured environment for accountability without the adversarial nature of court proceedings. You sound like the lawyer you are, Zara teased gently. Occupational hazard, he admitted with a smile. But this decision isn't about legal strategy. It's about what feels right to you, what would help you heal. From this experience, Zara gazed across the street at the Whitfield house. Its windows dark except for a single light upstairs, Karen's home office she'd learned from Olivia. I think, she said slowly, that I'd like to hear more about the process. No commitments yet, but I'm open to the possibility. Marcus squeezed her hand. That's my brave Z. Not brave, she corrected him. Just tired of being angry, tired of giving Karen Whitfield power over my peace of mind. As darkness fell, Zara's phone chimed with a text notification. She checked it and let out a surprised laugh. What is it? Marcus asked. It's Olivia, Zara said, showing him the screen. She's asking if I'd mind her stopping by sometime to talk about a journalism project she's working on for school. Something about housing discrimination in suburban communities. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The plot thickens. She's a good kid, Zara said softly, not defined by her mother's actions. Are you going to help her? Zara texted back a quick response. Happy to talk. Stop by Saturday afternoon. Olivia's reply came instantly. That would be amazing. Thank you. I guess I am, Zara told Marcus with a smile. Across the street in her upstairs office, Karen Whitfield scrolled through her daughter's text messages, having checked Olivia's phone while she was in the shower during a brief visit home to collect more clothes. The exchange with Zara Washington left her cold with shock and betrayal. Happy to talk. Stop by Saturday afternoon, that would be amazing, thank you. Her daughter and the woman who had ruined their family making plans together, collaborating on a project about housing discrimination, which could only cast further negative light on Karen and the community she'd worked so hard to protect. The therapist's card sat on her desk, forgotten as anger and hurt surged through her veins. If Richard and Olivia thought she would simply apologize and fade into the background while the Washingtons took over her neighborhood, influenced her daughter, and destroyed her marriage, they were sorely mistaken. Karen Whitfield still had fight left in her, and she would not go down quietly. The slam of the front door reverberated through the Whitfield house as Olivia walked in. She had timed her visit carefully, a quick Saturday morning stop to collect more clothes before her mother's usual shopping trip. But as she headed upstairs, Karen appeared in the hallway, arms folded, waiting. Glad you could make time in your busy schedule to come home, Karen said, her voice tight with forced casualness. Olivia paused, one hand on the banister. I told you I'd be stopping by. Yes, you did. Right before mentioning your new friendship with Zara Washington. Karen's eyes narrowed. The woman who humiliated our family and turned the entire neighborhood against us. That's not what happened, Mom, and you know it. Olivia continued up the stairs, but Karen followed. I saw your texts, Karen said, the words spilling out before she could reconsider. About meeting her this afternoon for your journalism project on housing discrimination. Olivia froze, then turned slowly. You went through my phone? When I was in the shower the other day? I'm your mother. I have a right to know who you're spending time with, especially when it's someone working against our family. She's not working against our family. She's the person you harassed and called the police on for getting packages delivered. And now you're going through my private messages? Olivia's voice rose. Do you have any idea how messed up that is? Karen stepped closer. What's messed up is my own daughter conspiring with the person who destroyed our reputation in this community. You destroyed our reputation, Mom. You. When you stalked our neighbors, when you edited that video to make yourself look right, when you refused to admit you made a mistake even after everyone saw the proof, tears of frustration sprang to Olivia's eyes. And now I find out you're spying on me too? I was protecting you, No, you weren't. You were protecting yourself, your ego, your need to be right even when you're wrong. Olivia brushed past Karen into her bedroom and pulled a duffel bag from under her bed. Zara didn't have to talk to me. She could have told me to get lost after what you did, but she listened. She showed me kindness I didn't deserve. The truth of her daughter's words stung Karen into momentary silence. The fractures in their home had been forming for years, hairline cracks that had finally split open under pressure. "We can still fix this," she said finally, her voice smaller. "If you'd just come home, if your father would stop this ridiculous separation threat." "It's not ridiculous," Olivia interrupted, zipping her bag closed. "It's the first time Dad's actually stood up for what's right instead of hiding at work. And I'm not coming home until you get help, Mom. Real help." "I don't need—" "Yes, you do." Olivia's shout surprised them both. "You need help because you can't even see what you've done. You think everyone else is the problem, the Washingtons, the neighbors, Dad, me. But it's you, Mom. And until you face that, there's nothing to come home to." "So that's it?" Karen asked, her voice cracking slightly. "You're choosing strangers over your own mother?" Olivia slung the bag over her shoulder, her expression softening slightly. "I'm not choosing anyone over you. I'm choosing truth over lies. I'm choosing to be someone I can respect when I look in the mirror." She moved toward the door, pausing beside Karen. "And Mom, so are you. Every day with every choice, you're choosing who you want to be. I just hope you choose better next time." Karen stepped aside, unable to meet her daughter's gaze as she passed. The front door closed with a quiet click that somehow hurt more than a slam would have. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Patricia. "Turn on the news. Channel 8. They caught the package thief." Officer James Reynolds guided 18-year-old Trevor Jackson into the police station, one hand on the young man's shoulder. The booking process was routine. Fingerprints, photograph, initial statement. What wasn't routine was the stack of evidence they'd collected. Security footage from multiple houses, photographs of Trevor taking packages, and most damning, the cache of stolen items recovered from a storage shed behind his mother's house. "My mom didn't know," Trevor had insisted repeatedly during the arrest. "She works 2 jobs. She thought I was saving up money from odd jobs around the neighborhood." Reynolds believed him. The boy's mother, a home health aide and weekend cashier, had collapsed into tears when they'd executed the search warrant. "Trevor, what have you done?" she'd whispered. The department had been under pressure to solve the package thefts after the viral video incident. What had begun as routine neighborhood complaints had escalated into a racially charged community crisis that had made national news. Reynolds had felt the weight of that pressure as he'd methodically tracked the pattern of thefts, set up surveillance, and finally caught Trevor in the act of taking a package from the Miller's porch 2 streets over from the Washingtons' home. Now, as he completed the booking paperwork, Reynolds couldn't help but reflect on the irony. The thief had been a teenager from the adjacent lower-income neighborhood, not the successful black professionals who'd been publicly accused. And while part of him felt satisfaction in solving the case, another part recognized that the damage had already been done. Arresting Trevor wouldn't undo the humiliation the Washingtons had endured or heal the fractures in the community. "Officer Reynolds?" The desk sergeant interrupted his thoughts. "Chief wants to see you when you're done. Says it's about the press statement for the package theft arrest." Reynolds nodded. The press would be all over this. The resolution to the story that had generated millions of views online. How they framed it mattered. It wasn't just about a teenager stealing packages. It was about confronting the assumptions that had led to a black family being criminalized for simply receiving deliveries at their own home. Helen Chen stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, listening to Richard Whitfield's strained voice. "I don't know if she'll agree to the mediation," he was saying. "She's not in a good place right now. Olivia just left again, and I think they had another argument." "I understand," Helen replied, watching through her window as a news van pulled onto their street, the first in days. But with Trevor Jackson's arrest, the timing for community healing couldn't be better. This is a chance for everyone to acknowledge mistakes and move forward. "Mistakes," Richard repeated with a hollow laugh. "Karen doesn't make mistakes, Helen. She makes righteous decisions that the rest of the world is too blind to understand. People can change, Richard. Can they? I'm starting to wonder. He sighed heavily. My firm called me in yesterday. They're reconsidering my client-facing role, given the ongoing personal situation. 20 years of service, and now I'm a liability because my wife can't admit she was wrong about a neighbor. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Helen winced. I'm sorry, Richard. That's unfair to you. Is it? I enabled her for years, working late to avoid the tension, letting her pour all her frustrated ambition into policing the neighborhood. I'm as responsible as she is. The mediation could help with that too, Helen suggested gently. It's not just about Karen and Zara. It's about all of us examining our roles in creating a community where this could happen. There was a long pause before Richard responded. I'll talk to her again. But Helen, don't get your hopes up. After ending the call, Helen pulled up the local news website on her tablet. The headline was already there. Teen arrested in Oakwood Heights package thefts. Neighbors grapple with racial profiling fallout. The doorbell rang, and Helen wasn't surprised to find Jeffrey Henderson on her porch, looking troubled. Have you seen the news? He asked without preamble. About Trevor Jackson? Yes. We were wrong, Helen. All of us who supported Karen, we were wrong. Jeffrey ran a hand through his thinning hair. I've spent 20 years in this neighborhood thinking I was one of the good ones, you know? Not racist, just concerned about property values and safety. But when I saw that black kid on the news, my first thought was relief. Relief that it wasn't someone who looked like the Washingtons because it would have validated Karen's suspicions. He shook his head in disgust. What does that say about me? Helen stepped aside, inviting him in. It says you're human, Jeffrey, and maybe more self-aware than most. That's why I'm organizing a community mediation. We need to talk about these things openly if we're going to heal. Karen won't come, Jeffrey predicted, following Helen into her kitchen. She's dug in too deep. Maybe. But the rest of us still need this conversation. Helen poured 2 cups of tea, pushing one toward Jeffrey. Including you. Will you be there? Jeffrey nodded slowly. Yeah, I need to be. For my own conscience, if nothing else. Zara Washington was watering her newly planted flower boxes when the news alert appeared on her phone. Arrest made in Oakwood Heights package thefts. The headline wasn't a surprise. Marcus had received a courtesy call from Officer Reynolds an hour earlier, giving them a heads up before the press release. But seeing it official, public, sent a wave of complex emotions through her. Vindication, certainly, but also a weariness. The arrest proved what she had known all along, that she and Marcus had been targeted based on race, not evidence. Marcus appeared in the doorway. News is out? Zara nodded, setting down her watering can. Twitter's already calling it the karmic conclusion to Karen's crusade. Catchy, Marcus said dryly, stepping onto the porch. Reynolds said the kid confessed to everything. Had quite a collection of stolen items in a shed behind his mom's house. And he's what, 18? Zara shook her head. Everything that happened, the confrontation, the viral video, the media circus, all because Karen couldn't imagine a world where black people legitimately receive packages. Speaking of Karen, Marcus said carefully, Helen called. The community mediation is scheduled for Wednesday evening. She wanted to know if we're still willing to participate given the new developments. Zara looked across the street to the Whitfield house, where curtains remained drawn despite the beautiful spring day. News vans had already begun to reappear, hungry for the next chapter in the viral story. She could only imagine what Karen must be feeling, the humiliation of being proven wrong, the isolation as even her own family distanced themselves. I've been thinking about pressing charges, Zara said finally. Harassment, defamation, emotional distress, we'd have a strong case, especially now. Marcus nodded. We would. The question is whether that's what you want. It's not. The answer surprised Zara even as she said it. Legal justice would feel hollow somehow. More division, more pain, more public spectacle. She turned to face Marcus. I want healing. For us, for this community, even for Karen if she's willing. I want to move forward, not keep reliving this over and over in court. Marcus smiled slightly. That sounds like a yes to Helen's mediation. It does, doesn't it? Zara's phone chimed with a text notification. It's Olivia. She's asking if she can still come by this afternoon. Says she had another fight with her mom and could use someone to talk to. Are you up for that? It's been an eventful morning. Zara considered the question. Actually, I think talking to Olivia might help me decide how to approach the mediation. She knows Karen better than anyone. True. Just be careful not to put her in the middle more than she already is. Of course. Zara sent a quick reply. Still on for 2 p.m. Bring your questions about the journalism project and we can talk about everything else too. As she looked back at the Whitfield house, Zara wondered what Karen was doing at that moment. Whether she was watching the news, reading the social media reactions, confronting the reality that her crusade had been built on nothing but bias. Despite everything, Zara found herself hoping Karen would find a path toward redemption, if not for her neighbor's sake, then for her daughter's. Karen sat motionless on her bed, the television remote still in her hand, as the news segment about Trevor Jackson's arrest concluded. The facts were undeniable. The teenager had confessed, the evidence was overwhelming, and the thefts had occurred primarily on streets that weren't even near her home. She had been wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. The realization settled over her like a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. She had been so certain, so convinced that the timing of the thefts and the Washingtons' arrival couldn't be coincidence, that their frequent deliveries were suspicious, that her instincts as neighborhood watch captain were infallible. But they weren't. They had been clouded by something she didn't want to name. Karen turned off the television, unable to bear the reporter's thinly veiled references to previous accusations against new residents and racially charged confrontations. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from Patricia, a text from Jeffrey that simply read, "We need to talk," and nothing from Richard or Olivia. A notification from the neighborhood app caught her attention. Community mediation scheduled, Wednesday 7 p.m., Oakwood Community Center. She opened it to find Helen Chen's carefully worded invitation. In light of recent events, including today's arrest in the package theft case, the HOA board is organizing a facilitated community discussion to address the impact of these incidents on our neighborhood and chart a path forward. All residents are welcome, though we especially encourage those directly involved to attend. Professional mediation will be provided to ensure a respectful and productive conversation. Karen's first instinct was indignation. A public forum where she would be expected to grovel to admit her mistakes while the entire neighborhood watched? Absolutely not. But as she set the phone down, Karen caught sight of herself in the bedroom mirror, pale, drawn, alone in a house that had once been full of family. Richard's suitcase was still missing from their closet. Olivia's room was half empty. The neighborhood she had dedicated 20 years to protecting now viewed her as either a villain or an embarrassment. And for the first time, Karen allowed herself to consider a terrifying possibility. What if she deserved it? The thought opened a floodgate of memories. The way she had followed Zara with her camera, the moment she had called the police, the surge of fear-driven adrenaline when she yelled that Zara might be reaching for something, the careful editing of the video to remove the parts that didn't support her narrative. Karen sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. Had she always been this person? Or had she become something unrecognizable even to herself? So, gradually she hadn't noticed the transformation? She thought of Olivia's parting words. I'm choosing to be someone I can respect when I look in the mirror. The mirror now reflected a woman Karen barely knew, isolated, defensive, clinging to righteousness because admitting error felt like annihilation. When had her identity become so fragile that being wrong about a neighbor threatened her entire sense of self? Her phone buzzed again. Richard this time. Saw the news. Helen called about Wednesday's mediation. I'm planning to attend. Hope you'll consider it too. This could be a first step toward healing for everyone, including us. Karen stared at the message, at the tentative olive branch it represented. Richard wasn't giving up on her entirely, even after everything, but he was asking her to do the one thing that terrified her most: face her mistakes publicly. The very thought made her physically ill. And yet the alternative, continuing to defend the indefensible, watching her family and community slip further away, seemed suddenly more painful. Karen picked up Dr. Levinson's card from her nightstand, turning it over in her fingers. Tuesday, at 2 p.m., the day before the community mediation. Maybe she thought she didn't have to face everyone alone, without preparation. Maybe there was a middle path between defiant denial and complete surrender. She texted Richard back, "I'll think about the mediation. Going to keep the therapy appointment first." His response came quickly, a simple message that nonetheless made her eyes sting. "Proud of you. I'll be there if you want me to." Karen set the phone down and walked to the window, peering through the blinds at the Washington house across the street. Olivia's words echoed in her mind. Every day, with every choice, you're choosing who you want to be. The question was, who did Karen Whitfield want to be now? The woman who doubled down on her mistakes out of pride? Or the woman who found the courage to face them, however painful the process might be? She picked up her phone and added an event to her calendar. Dr. Levinson, Tuesday to 2 p.m. Then, after a long moment of hesitation, a second entry. Community mediation, Wednesday 7 p.m. Not a commitment, just a possibility. A door left slightly ajar to whatever might lie on the other side. The Oakwood Heights Community Center had never felt smaller than it did on Wednesday evening. As residents filed in for the mediation session, Helen Chen had arranged the chairs in a large circle, no tables to hide behind, no back rows for the hesitant. A professional mediator, Dr. Sophia Ramirez, stood at the entrance, greeting each arrival with a calm smile that belied the tension in the room. "Remember, this is a structured dialogue," Helen reminded everyone as they settled in. "Dr. Ramirez will guide the conversation, and everyone will have a chance to speak." Zara and Marcus Washington arrived precisely on time, dressed in business casual attire that struck the perfect balance between formality and approachability. They exchanged nods with several neighbors, a few of whom had left supportive notes in their mailbox after Trevor Jackson's arrest. "Thank you for coming," Helen said quietly to Zara as she directed them to their seats. "I know this can't be easy. Necessary things rarely are," Zara replied with a faint smile. The circle gradually filled. Jeffrey Henderson and his wife. Patricia Lawson, tight-lipped and uncomfortable. The Millers, who had been among the first to publicly support the Washingtons. Officer Reynolds in civilian clothes but unmistakably present in his professional capacity. A dozen other neighbors representing various perspectives within the community. A murmur rippled through the gathering when Olivia Whitfield entered, accompanied by Maya's mother rather than her own parents. She glanced around nervously before taking a seat opposite the Washingtons. At 7:05, Richard Whitfield arrived alone. He spoke briefly to Dr. Ramirez before taking a seat next to Olivia, who gave him a questioning look. "She's still coming," he whispered. "Just needed a minute." 5 tense minutes later, Karen Whitfield stepped into the community center. Her entrance created a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Conversations halted, postures stiffened. She wore a conservative blue dress, her hair and makeup perfectly done, as though armoring herself against what was to come. Only the slight tremor in her hands revealed her anxiety as she scanned the circle. Her gaze landed briefly on Zara and Marcus, then darted away. She made her way to the empty seat beside Richard, careful not to make eye contact with anyone. "Thank you all for coming," Dr. Ramirez began once Karen was seated. "I'm Dr. Sophia Ramirez, a conflict resolution specialist. I've been asked to facilitate this community dialogue about recent events that have affected Oakwood Heights and its residents." Her voice was warm, but authoritative. "This is not a debate or a trial. It's a space for honest communication, understanding, and hopefully, healing. She outlined the ground rules. No interrupting. Speak only from personal experience. Focus on impact rather than intent. And commit to confidentiality about personal details shared. We'll begin with opening statements from those most directly involved, then open the floor to the community. Remember, the goal is not to assign blame, but to understand harm and explore paths forward. Zara went first, her composed demeanor belying the emotional toll of addressing the very neighbors who had witnessed her humiliation. 3 months ago, Marcus and I moved to Oakwood Heights with such hope, she began. We saved for years to buy in this neighborhood with its excellent schools and beautiful homes. We envisioned building a life here, maybe raising children someday. She paused, meeting the eyes of several neighbors. Instead, I was surveilled, photographed without consent, confronted and accused of theft for receiving packages at my own home. When the police arrived, I feared for my life, a fear many of you may never understand. And when the video went viral, I experienced the special kind of terror that comes from being black in America and suddenly visible in all the wrong ways. Her voice remained steady, but Marcus reached for her hand as she continued. What hurt most wasn't just the accusation. It was the erasure of everything we'd worked for, our education, our careers, our careful financial planning, replaced by suspicion based solely on how we look. It was the exhaustion of having to be perfect, poised, and non-threatening even while being criminalized on my own property. She looked directly at Karen for the first time. I don't share this to shame anyone. I share it because understanding requires truth, and healing requires understanding. Marcus spoke briefly, emphasizing their desire to be part of the community, despite everything. We chose Oakwood Heights. We still choose it, but that choice has to be mutual. When Karen's turn came, she unfolded a typewritten statement with trembling hands. I want to express my regret for any distress my actions may have caused, she read, her voice mechanical. As neighborhood watch captain, I was committed to keeping our community safe, and in my zeal to address the package thefts, I made assumptions that have proven incorrect. She glanced up briefly, then back to her paper. While my intentions were to protect Oakwood Heights, I recognized that the impact of my actions was hurtful, and for that I apologize. The words hung in the air, technically an apology but lacking the resonance of genuine remorse. Richard shifted uncomfortably beside her. Thank you, Karen, Dr. Ramirez said gently. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Perhaps something more personal, less prepared? Karen folded the paper carefully. I think my statement covers everything necessary. Dr. Ramirez nodded without judgment and opened the floor to other community members. Jeffrey Henderson spoke first. I've lived in Oakwood Heights for 17 years. I supported Karen initially because I trusted her judgment as neighborhood watch captain. He paused, visibly uncomfortable. But I was wrong. We were wrong. And I need to own that. Patricia Lawson was less conciliatory. I still believe Karen was just doing her job. Yes, she made a mistake, but who among us hasn't? The way this community has turned on her is shameful. Several others shared their perspectives, some supportive of the Washingtons, others defensive of Karen, most somewhere in between, struggling to reconcile neighborhood harmony with accountability. Helen Chen spoke about her own experiences as one of the first non-white families in Oakwood Heights 20 years earlier. When we moved in, there were no confrontations or viral videos, but there were whispers, exclusions, assumptions. It took years to feel truly accepted. She looked around the circle. We've made progress, but clearly not enough. Officer Reynolds addressed the law enforcement perspective, acknowledging the dangerous potential of the confrontation. When someone suggests a person of color might be reaching for something during a police interaction, it creates a high-risk situation that could end tragically. This isn't theoretical. It happens across this country with devastating consequences. As the discussion continued, the community's complex relationship with race, class, and belonging surfaced in ways both uncomfortable and necessary. Some residents, acknowledged their own biases for the first time. Others spoke of their hopes for a more inclusive neighborhood. The conversation was difficult, but distinctly productive, until Karen was asked to respond to what she'd heard. "I appreciate everyone's perspectives," she said stiffly. "As I've stated, I regret the impact of my actions and have apologized accordingly." "Mom." Olivia's voice cut through the tension. She hadn't spoken until now, but something in her mother's response propelled her to her feet. "That's not good. Enough, and you know it." All eyes turned to the teenager, whose face flushed with emotion. "Olivia, this isn't the time," Karen began. "It's exactly the time," Olivia interrupted. "Because this isn't just about one incident. It's about patterns." She turned to address the circle. "I grew up watching my mother's suspicion of anyone different. The comments about the Singh family's strange-smelling cooking. The way she'd clutch her purse when young black men walked by at the mall. The constant assumptions that people who didn't look like us didn't belong in our spaces." Karen's face drained of color. "Olivia, stop." "I can't stop, Mom. Because I've been silent too long." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "Do you know what it's like to grow up absorbing those messages? To catch yourself having the same ugly thoughts and hating yourself for it? To realize the person who taught you right from wrong was teaching you something fundamentally wrong?" The room had gone completely still, the raw pain in the girl's voice commanding every person's attention. "I love you, Mom. But what you did to the Washingtons wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was the logical conclusion of beliefs you've held my entire life. And until you face that, nothing changes." She wiped at her tears. "I don't want to be ashamed of my own mother anymore." Richard reached for Olivia's hand as she sat down, his own eyes damp with emotion. Karen sat frozen, her carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of her daughter's truth. "Karen?" Dr. Ramirez prompted gently. "Would you like to respond?" For several long moments, Karen couldn't speak. When she finally did, her voice was barely audible. "She's right." The simple admission seemed to physically deflate her. Everything Olivia said, she's right. Karen looked up, her gaze moving slowly around the circle before settling on Zara and Marcus. "My prepared statement was inadequate, dishonest, really." She took a shaky breath. "The truth is, when you moved in, I immediately saw you as outsiders. Not neighbors, threats. I told myself it was about community safety, property values, standards. But it was about fear of change, fear of becoming irrelevant in a community that had become my whole identity after my career failed." Tears spilled down her cheeks unchecked. "I was so desperate to matter, to have purpose, that I appointed myself gatekeeper of a neighborhood that never needed my protection. And I was so convinced of my own righteousness that I couldn't see what was obvious to everyone else, that my suspicion of you had nothing to do with packages and everything to do with race." The admission hung in the air, its honesty startling after weeks of defensiveness and denial. "I'm truly sorry," Karen continued, looking directly at Zara. "Not for how my actions were perceived, but for what I did. For surveilling you. For confronting you. For putting you in danger when I called police and suggested you might be armed. For editing that video to make myself look justified. For refusing to acknowledge my mistakes even when confronted with evidence." Her voice broke. "And I'm sorry it took losing my family's respect to finally face the truth about myself." The silence that followed was profound. A collective breath held as everyone waited for Zara's response. "Thank you for your honesty," Zara said finally. "That couldn't have been easy." "It's nowhere near enough," Karen acknowledged. "I know that." "It's a start," Zara replied carefully. "Genuine accountability always is." The conversation shifted, then becoming more authentic as Karen's vulnerability created space for others to examine their own biases more honestly. Several neighbors acknowledged their initial suspicion of the Washingtons, despite never acting on it as Karen had. Others spoke of their commitment to making Oakwood Heights more welcoming to diverse residents. As the mediation neared its conclusion, an unexpected visitor arrived. A slender black woman in hospital scrubs slipped into the back of the room. Dr. Ramirez paused the discussion to acknowledge her. "I'm Denise Jackson," the woman said, her voice soft but determined. "Trevor's mother. I heard about this meeting and I felt I should be here." Helen quickly arranged another chair in the circle. "We're honored you came, Ms. Jackson. Please join us." Denise settled nervously into the seat. "I want to apologize for what my son did. The packages he took, the trouble he caused." She looked around the circle, her exhaustion evident in the lines of her face. "Trevor made his own choices, and he's facing consequences, but I keep thinking about what led to those choices. The medical bills after my mother's stroke, my having to take a second job, Trevor feeling responsible for helping support us." She turned toward Zara and Marcus. "None of that excuses what he did, but when I heard how his actions had been used to target you..." She shook her head. Another black family bearing the weight of someone else's assumptions. I couldn't stay silent. Her presence added another dimension to the conversation. The economic disparities between Oakwood Heights and neighboring communities. The lack of opportunities for youth like Trevor. The broader social context in which all of their interactions occurred. By the end of the evening, the group had established concrete action steps. A neighborhood inclusion committee to review HOA policies and welcome new residents. Community education sessions on implicit bias. A youth mentorship program connecting Oakwood Heights professionals with students from Trevor's neighborhood, and a commitment to regular community dialogues like this one. As people began to disperse, Karen approached Zara hesitantly. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quietly. "I just want you to know that I'm committed to doing the work, with Dr. Levinson, with my family, with myself, whatever it takes to be worthy of this community." Zara studied her for a moment. "Worthiness isn't something you earn through perfection, Karen. It's something you claim by acknowledging your humanity, flaws, mistakes, growth and all." She glanced over at Olivia, who was watching them intently. "Your daughter helped me see that, actually." Karen looked surprised. "She did?" "She told me everyone deserves the chance to be better than their worst moments." Zara smiled slightly. "Smart kid you've got there. Smarter than her mother, certainly," Karen admitted. "I hope someday she'll be proud of me again." "That journey starts now," Zara said, nodding toward where Richard and Olivia stood waiting. "One honest conversation at a time." As Karen walked toward her family, still separate but perhaps not as distant as before, Marcus joined Zara, slipping an arm around her waist. "You okay?" he asked softly. Zara leaned into him, watching the Whitfields engage in careful, tentative conversation. "I think I will be." She turned to look up at him. "This doesn't fix everything. The harm was real, and healing takes time. But it's a start." Marcus echoed her earlier words. "A start," Zara agreed, her gaze taking in the community center, where neighbors lingered in small groups, conversations continuing beyond the formal mediation. "And right now that feels like enough." Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky over Oakwood Heights. A community changed, challenged, and perhaps beginning to change in ways that truly mattered. The July sun poured through the Washington home's new bay windows, casting warm light across freshly painted walls and gleaming hardwood floors. 3 months of renovation work had finally transformed the house into the space Zara and Marcus had envisioned when they first signed the papers. Open, welcoming, distinctly theirs. "The countertops look incredible," Helen Chen remarked, running her hand along the sleek quartz surface in the kitchen. "Well worth the delivery drama." Zara laughed, a genuine sound that would have been impossible months earlier, when any reference to packages or deliveries had felt like reopening a wound. Right? 3 months and about 1,000 internet conspiracy theories later. The housewarming gathering was intentionally small, just a few neighbors who had become something more than acquaintances during the tumultuous spring. Helen and her husband, the Millers from across the street, Officer Reynolds and his wife, Jeffrey Henderson, who had become an unexpected ally in community conversations about inclusion. And most surprisingly, the Whitfields, Richard, Olivia, and Karen. Their arrival had created a moment of tension, quickly smoothed over by Olivia's enthusiastic compliments about the renovation and Marcus's gracious tour of the house. Now Karen stood somewhat apart, nursing a glass of iced tea by the patio doors, her posture more subdued than the commanding presence she'd once projected throughout the neighborhood. "It's quite a gesture, inviting them," Helen said quietly, following Zara's gaze to where Karen was examining the new sliding doors. "It was actually Olivia's idea," Zara replied. "She's been coming over twice a week to work on her discrimination in housing project. She wanted her parents to see the finished house, and maybe to see that we could all be in the same space without catastrophe." Helen nodded approvingly. "That girl has remarkable wisdom for 16. "She does. I keep telling her she should consider law instead of journalism. She has a natural sense of justice." Zara arranged a platter of appetizers as she spoke. "Besides, avoiding the Whitfields forever would be exhausting given that we live across from each other. Better to establish a new normal, however awkward initially." Across the room, Olivia was setting up a small display on the dining table, arranging printouts and photographs with deliberate care. Marcus approached, offering to help. "It's my project presentation," Olivia explained, her eyes bright with purpose. "We're doing a preview for the Social Justice Club's exhibition next week at school. Zara helped me interview 3 generations of Black homeowners about their experiences." Marcus examined the display with genuine interest. A timeline showed housing discrimination policies from redlining through present-day disparities. Photos of various neighborhoods juxtaposed affluent, predominantly white communities with more diverse, often less resourced areas. Personal testimonials from interviewees described everything from subtle steering by real estate agents to explicit rejection by lenders. "This is impressive work," he said. "Comprehensive but personal. That's a difficult balance to strike." "That was Zara's advice," Olivia replied, pride evident in her voice. "She said statistics matter, but stories change hearts." Richard Whitfield joined them, glancing from the project to his daughter with unmistakable pride. "Your mother and I are very impressed, Liv. Your passion for this topic really shows." "Speaking of your mother," Marcus said carefully, "how are things at home these days?" The question would have been unthinkable months ago, too personal, too fraught with potential landmines. But the mediation session had created space for a different kind of interaction between the families, one marked by cautious honesty rather than defensive distance. "Better," Olivia said thoughtfully. "The therapy is helping, both Mom's individual sessions and our family counseling. She's different, quieter sometimes, more reflective." She arranged a final photo on the display. "She still has moments when the old defensiveness comes back, but she catches herself now. That's progress, right?" "Significant progress," Marcus agreed. "Growth isn't linear for any of us." Richard nodded, a flicker of emotion crossing his features. "Karen's doing the work, truly. It hasn't been easy for her to confront some painful truths about herself, about us as a family, really." He lowered his voice slightly. "I turned down a promotion last month. Would have meant more travel, higher salary, but even less time at home. For years I used work to avoid the tensions at home, and that, well, it didn't serve any of us well. Addressing root causes rather than symptoms," Marcus observed. "That's often the harder path." "Worth it, though," Richard replied, watching as Olivia welcomed Helen to view her project. "I'm actually home for dinner most nights now. We're talking, really talking, for the first time in years." Their conversation was interrupted as Officer Reynolds arrived, accompanied by a lanky teenager whose nervous demeanor suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "Hope you don't mind an extra guest," Reynolds said to Marcus. "Trevor Jackson is doing his community service hours with the neighborhood beautification program. We just finished planting those new flower beds at the community center entrance." An awkward silence fell as several guests recognized the name. Trevor Jackson, the actual package thief whose arrest had forced the neighborhood to confront its biases. The teenager shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of his role in the community's recent history. Zara approached with a warm smile, breaking the tension. Of course he's welcome. There's plenty of food, and those community center beds look amazing. You have quite a talent for landscape design, Trevor. The teenager's surprise at her kindness was evident. Thank you, ma'am. I'm really sorry about everything that happened because of what I did. We've all made mistakes, Zara said simply. The question is what we learn from them. She guided Trevor toward the refreshments, engaging him in conversation about the native plants they'd selected for the community center. Her gracious inclusion of someone who had inadvertently catalyzed her own trauma spoke volumes about her character, something not lost on Karen Whitfield, who watched the interaction from her position near the windows. As the gathering continued, the subtle changes in Oakwood Heights became evident through various conversations. Helen described the newly formed Community Relations Committee, which had replaced the old Neighborhood Watch with a more inclusive approach to community safety and welcome. Karen's actually been instrumental in drafting the new protocols, Helen noted, loud enough for others to hear, particularly the section on addressing concerns without making assumptions based on appearance. Karen looked up, clearly surprised, at the public acknowledgement. I just wanted to make sure we learned from past mistakes, she said quietly. The committee's doing important work. Jeffrey Henderson chimed in. The welcome program for new residents has been a big hit too. 3 families moved in last month and they all mentioned how supported they felt with the resource packets and personal introductions. And the mentorship partnership with Westside High School is taking off, Officer Reynolds added. 12 students matched with professionals from Oakwood so far, including Trevor here, who's working with a landscape architect now. The conversation flowed naturally to other neighborhood improvements, the upgraded playground equipment, the expanded community garden plots, the new book club focusing on diverse authors. Small changes, perhaps, in the context of broader social issues, but meaningful in their cumulative effect on the community's culture. As afternoon stretched into evening, guests gradually departed until only the Whitfields remained. Olivia was helping Zara clear dessert plates while Richard and Marcus discussed a recent Supreme Court decision affecting housing policy. Karen stood by the front windows, watching the sunset paint the neighborhood in golden hues. After a moment's hesitation, Zara joined her. Your home is beautiful, Karen said softly. You've created something really special here. Thank you, Zara replied. It took longer than expected, but that seems fitting somehow. Worthwhile things usually do. Karen nodded, understanding the subtext. Olivia tells me everything she's learning from you, not just about the housing project, but about navigating spaces where you don't always feel welcome, standing firm without becoming bitter. She turned to face Zara directly. I want to thank you for that, for being willing to mentor her despite everything that happened. Olivia makes it easy, Zara said with genuine affection. She has a natural sense of justice and she's not afraid to ask difficult questions. Wonder where she gets that from, Karen said with a self-deprecating smile. The difficult questions part, I mean, not necessarily the justice. I think you underestimate yourself, Zara observed. What you've done these past months, the therapy, the committee work, rebuilding your relationship with Olivia, that takes courage. Karen's smile faded into something more vulnerable. Some days I still don't recognize myself. The person I was before, so certain, so righteous, so blind to my own biases. She shook her head. I look back at how I treated you, what I did, and I feel physically ill. I'm so deeply sorry, Zara. No qualifications this time. The apology hung in the air between them, simple, unadorned, sincere in a way the carefully crafted statement at the mediation had not been. I believe you, Zara said finally, and I appreciate hearing it. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as the neighborhood street lights began to illuminate. Neither woman suggested they would be friends. Some bridges take longer to build if they can be built at all. But something had shifted. A mutual recognition of the other's humanity that had been absent in their first encounter. "We should probably get going," Karen said, glancing toward where Olivia was showing Marcus something on her phone, both laughing at whatever they saw. Olivia has a debate tournament tomorrow." "Of course," Zara replied. "She mentioned she's arguing the affirmative on reparations policy." "She is. Spends every evening practicing arguments in the mirror." The fondness in Karen's voice was unmistakable. "She's found her voice these past few months. I'm still learning to listen properly, but I'm trying." "That's all any of us can do," Zara said. "Try, learn, try again." As the Whitfields prepared to leave, Olivia hugged Zara warmly. "Thank you for having us, and for everything with the project. My teacher says it has real potential to educate people." "It absolutely does," Zara agreed. "Send me the final presentation. Slides when you're done, okay? I'd love to see how it all comes together." "I will." Olivia glanced toward her parents, who were thanking Marcus for his hospitality. "And thanks for, making space for all of us today. It means a lot to my mom, even if she doesn't say it directly." "Small steps," Zara said with a gentle smile. "That's how we build anything that lasts." After the Whitfields departed, Marcus closed the front door with a sigh of relief. "Well, we did it. First official gathering in our fully renovated home, including the neighbors who once called the police on us. If that's not a plot twist, I don't know what is." Zara laughed, leaning into his embrace. "Life rarely follows a predictable narrative. True. Though I have to admit I'm still amazed at how naturally you interact with Karen, after everything that happened." "It's not easy," Zara admitted. "There are moments when I still feel that surge of anger, the echo of that day's humiliation, but holding on to that only gives her continued power over my peace." She shrugged. "Besides, watching her genuine efforts to change, it would be hypocritical to advocate for growth and then deny her the space to demonstrate it." They moved to the front porch, settling into the new wicker chairs positioned to enjoy the evening air. The street was quiet, most neighbors having retreated indoors as twilight deepened into night. Across the way, lights glowed warmly in the Whitfield home, a family reconstituted, imperfect but healing. "Do you think we'll ever truly belong here?" Zara asked suddenly, voicing the question that had lingered even as they'd invested in renovations, in relationships, in putting down roots. Marcus considered this carefully. "I think belonging is always a work in progress, especially for people like us in spaces like this. It's not a fixed destination. It's continually negotiated through everyday interactions, through standing our ground when necessary and extending grace when possible." "That's a very lawyer-like answer," Zara teased. "Would you prefer a husband-like answer instead?" Marcus smiled, taking her hand. "In that case, yes, we belong here. Not because everyone welcomes us with open arms, or because all biases have magically disappeared. We belong because we've claimed this space as ours, through adversity, through confrontation, through persistence. We belong because we've refused to be defined by someone else's assumptions about who we are and what we deserve." Zara squeezed his hand, the weight of his words settling around her like a protective embrace. "I like that answer better." "Thought you might." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as fireflies began to emerge, tiny lights punctuating the darkness. From inside came the faint sound of their favorite jazz album, a housewarming gift from Helen playing on the new sound system. "We should probably clean up the kitchen," Zara said eventually, though she made no move to rise. "It can wait," Marcus replied. "This moment feels more important somehow." And it was. In the quiet of a summer evening, on a porch they had fought to claim as their own, Zara and Marcus Washington were no longer newcomers under scrutiny, but residents building a life. The journey had been neither simple nor painless, exposing raw truths about their community and themselves. But in confronting those truths, in refusing to accept bias as inevitable, they had helped forge something potentially stronger than the superficial harmony that had existed before. Across the street, Olivia Whitfield appeared briefly at her window, waving when she spotted them on their porch. Zara waved back, a simple gesture that would have been unimaginable 4 months earlier. "Small steps," she murmured, echoing her earlier words to Olivia. "Building something that lasts," Marcus completed the thought. As night fell completely over Oakwood Heights, stars emerged above a neighborhood subtly but meaningfully changed. Not perfect, not fully healed, but consciously evolving toward something better than what had come before. For tonight at least, that progress felt like enough. In the Washington home, finally and truly their home, the renovation was complete. The rebuilding, for all of them, continued. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.